Welcome to the Homunculus Book Club. You might know it as the Occult Book Club. And man, I wasn't expecting this one. This one is gonna have cosmic snail trails. We're gonna live life in reverse. We're gonna learn the secrets to basically immortality. We're
Hold
gonna
on,
talk
dude,
about
dude, dude,
reincarnation.
dude. Hold on.
Did I mention the cosmic snail trail?
Thomas, where is your foreplay, brother? You gotta treat the audience like
There's
a
not enough
lady.
time, man. There's not enough time for this. It's
I
only
know.
the first 3 chapters, and I got like 50 pages of notes.
Listen, welcome to another episode of the Occult Book Club. I'm one of your hosts of whatever this thing is, Juan from the Juan Podcast. Follow me, tjojp.com, patreon.com/Juan Podcast, all that good stuff. And Thomas, introduce yourself to the people, bro. Don't ever
You
do
guys
that
know
again.
me as Paranoid American or Thomas. You can find me at paranoidamerican.com, at Paranoid American on Instagram, and I'm streaming live right now on the YouTube. So if you're not already following me on YouTube, follow me now so I can get my first 1,000 and start selling cool crystals and like all sorts of cool shit. So
Yeah, I am. We're on a lot of different platforms. We're trying to go live on some other ones, but I'm like, they're pinging that they're not going live, so I'm gonna just remove them. But yeah, welcome everybody. This is gonna be, we're doing I should have put that in the description. We're only doing the first 3 chapters because how many pages is this book? This would be absurd to cover in one sitting. I mean, this would be like the
version we're looking
16-hour.
at's around 700 pages or so, and I think the first 3 constituted up until page like 147 or something. So the first 150 pages we got a review plus the intro and the forward and some backstory.
Well, I missed the intro, so you're gonna have to back me up on that one, brother, because I caught that after the fact, and I don't even have my notes
Making
open,
mistakes already, man.
Rookie, dude,
Well,
rookie.
I'll let you know one thing in the intro. And so this book is a Rosicrucian book. It's probably the first one that I've read in any sort of detail. I'm familiar with who the Rosicrucians are, the Rosy Cross, some of the concepts. It's kind of like a Christian mysticism ordeal. But this one gave me the first big insight. And I also noticed so much influence that this must have had on Manly Palmer Hall. Because this book, the original version came out in 1909. The one that we read was 1929. So the 20-year difference, a lot of that went into the intro. So I'll catch you up on the intro. But I want to ask, did you see any of the Manly P. Hall influence throughout this thing?
Absolutely. And I didn't even read the table of contents. And in this book, so
Flying blind, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I did the research that we were going to agree on, right? The first 3 chapters, and it kind of triggers the religious crowd, because in this book they talk about how Christ, or I'm going to put it up right out front, that Christ is 3 separate beings, right? They don't believe in that Christ resurrected in his body, his actual biological body.
More than 3. There's like a whole bunch of rules here. I think I made a couple notes that about halfway through chapter 2, I felt like I was doing algebra homework again from sort of like middle school or high school. So I was getting a lot of those vibes where I felt like there was going to be a cop quiz at any point. Like you were going to turn the page and it was going to be like, okay, you're in the 3rd region, but you go back, 1 dimension and then up 2 levels. Where are you?
Every occult scientist knows this, Thomas, right? It's like, it's a matter of that's the thing about different beliefs, bro. Like, it's okay if you want to talk about your beliefs, but when you're so matter of fact that is the truth, that's when I get kind of like, okay. I was like, no, this is the way that it is. And it's always funny that whenever we're not putting the respect that these topics need, Thomas. I don't think that we're really putting the respect down. I know some people are going to be talking about that.
Well, this one I've got some refutations too, because again, this is 100 years ago, so a lot has happened. A lot more research has come out in 100 years, and there's some bold, matter-of-fact claims that come out in this book that I don't know if they're just outright wrong or if just there was a different amount of perspective that was needed. But the way some things are phrased, it almost feels like you get to debunk some stuff halfway through, which sounds silly about debunking, Christian mysticism. But there's a few things at least we'll get into. We'll debate a little bit maybe.
Yeah, it's got some Gnostic undertones, obviously, right? And then, yes, absolutely, Max Heindel did inspire Daddy Manly P. Hall. And I just did an episode with William Ramsey on his podcast, and we talked about Manly P. Hall for a little bit. So I wanted to start off with the introduction of who Max was, right? So we're covering, for those that haven't caught on.
And you've got the homework on this where I don't know a whole lot about Max Heindel, so go for it.
The Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception by Max Heindel. Some people would consider this his magnum opus, but who was he? Max Heindel wasn't his first name. His first name was, the first time that he got it was Carl Louis von Grasshoff. And he was a Danish-American Christian occultist, astrologer, and mystic. So that's kind of weird, right? Christian occultist. That's kind of like a paradox there. So he was born in Denmark into the noble family von Grasshoff. And the thing was, he was born into a noble family, and then his father, Francis, married a Danish woman of noble birth, but then when his father took off, his father died when he was 6. They grew up poor. So I didn't understand that part. Like, he married, was it noble birth? Like, was she royalty? Or I don't know anything about the Grasshoff family, but apparently that's who he grew up as in that family. And then in 1903, he moved to Los Angeles. And this is the early 1900s. Was this time. We had Blavatsky, we had Crowley, we had Hall, I always bring up Nietzsche, but he went insane and died in 1888. But this spiritualist movement as well, you had that. The occultism was going rampant. And it seems like Los Angeles, because Parsons was around Los Angeles, right? California, this place that's like attracting people, right? All the greatest hits were going and migrating there. So after attending a lecture by none other than C.W. Ledbetter, right? And a lot of this stuff is a lot of theosophists type of stuff, right? The Theosophical Society, which
very heavy West Coast, by the way. A lot of that, like, there was some Christian mysticism on the East Coast, but for some reason, the West Coast got a pass through Rosicrucianism and through a whole bunch of other Golden, Order, Hermetic Dawn, or Golden Dawn, and they got to do kind of like that hanky-panky occult stuff that on the other coast almost would have gotten you excommunicated from your towns. So yeah, that it's interesting that like that Los Angeles West Coast crowd got such a head start on occultism.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, Thomas. I never thought about
if you look at the very last like witch hunts, there was a warlock that was actually brought to court and he got off, but I think that was in the 19th century, the very early 19th century. But a lot of that was all on the East Coast. And on the West Coast, for some reason, if you were affluent and if you had money and you came from a noble family, like you were mentioning, you were allowed to read grimoires and talk about magic and almost say like blasphemous things. But if you were poor, you couldn't, because now all of a sudden that's evil and you're bringing up incantations and summoning devils. But if you're rich and you've got the family, then you're just, into esoteric goodiness.
And there's a distinction to be made as well. A lot of the times, at least in the 16th and 17th century, when these grimoires were coming out, a lot of them were natural magic. And natural magic was okay because it was things that God put in nature and you were just mixing them, right? A plus B equals C. So it was okay, as long as you weren't doing some sort of theurgical thing, and theurgy is using outside influences to influence your reality. So calling upon other spirits in the astral planes or whatever you want to call it, that's demonic. Now, if you're just mixing, right?
So you're calling this Rosicrucian as a book demonic in a way then, right?
Well, a lot of people don't know, Thomas, that I actually grew up Pentecostal Christian. I haven't really said that on the podcast very much, but a lot of people
start talking in tongues in the middle of this.
So when I was raised Pentecostal Christian, a lot of people don't know that. Anything that was outside of Christianity is, and again, if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you're going to hell. It's all demonic. And in this book, it talks about how Jesus, right? They don't see Jesus as God, and that's one of the more confusing aspects of Christianity, because God is the Holy Trinity. He is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I remember as a kid going like, "Wait a minute, how is he? So he's no, but there's 3 separate entities. Like what? No, so it's God, okay, and then Jesus, yeah, he's the Son, so
he didn't carry the one. It's always the classic
he's
problem.
His own dad. How is that going on? And then it was like, oh yeah, but then he's like this metaphysical thing too. It's like, as a kid, bro, it just blew my mind. So,
well, all answers are going to be revealed today.
Yeah, so all answers. Sign up for the Patreon. I made a $666 tier. I will give you the recipe for the Philosopher's Stone. So sign up on there. And so he became the vice president of the Theosophical Society in 1904 and 1905. He also became a vegetarian and began the study of astrology because he felt it gave him the key of unlocking the mysteries of man's inner nature. He met his future wife, Augusta Foss, around this time. And around this time, overworking, overexerting himself led him to have severe heart trouble in 1905. And for months, he lay at the point of death. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because he said that during his time of his illness, he spent most of it outside of his body. So he says here, consciously working and seeking for truth as he might find it on the invisible plane. So in 1906 to 1907, he was doing a lecture tour, going around sharing his occult knowledge. And after a course of lectures, again, he was forced to spend time in the hospital he had heart valve problems. And so he goes on 1907. He is in Minnesota, traveled to Berlin, Germany with his friend. And for months, he was trying to get him to hear a lecture series by Rudolf Steiner. Now, I didn't really get into it, but I'll be 100%. I've never read Rudolf Steiner's work. I've stumbled across it. I don't know if you have. Have you, Thomas, ever read his stuff?
I'm still very American-centric. I'm just now starting to branch out. But I mean, this guy was also American, so I haven't branched out too much yet.
Okay. Well, maybe we should cover Rudolf Steiner because he was an inspiration. There's actually papers dedicated to the different arguments of Steiner and Heindel. So during his short stay in Germany, he developed a sincere admiration of Steiner, to which he, quote, esteemed teacher and valued friend. He dedicated his magnum opus. He sat on several lectures and had one or two interviews with Steiner. So, and then Sophisy, whatever. Anyways, it's the idea of animals and, let's see here, spiritualist movement. And it's the idea that, I don't know what that is. I thought I had it right. But anyways, it has something to do with animals or something where they can have spiritual experiences, but that's a whole other podcast. And but at the time, he understood that his teacher could not help him advance along the path of spiritual enlightenment. Heindel reported that with his mind already made up to return, so going back to the U.S., feeling that he had given up his work in America in vain to take this trip, he was visited by the vital body of a spiritual being who identified himself as an elder brother of the Rosicrucian order, an order in the inner worlds formed in the year 1313, and having no direct connection to physical organizations would call themselves by this name. Heindel claimed that the elder brother gave him information which was concise and logical and beyond anything he was capable of writing.
Hey, that sounds exactly like the story of There's No Real Cartesian and the old man from the Voyage to Cartesius, right? The guy that finds his mentor that leads him around Europe and teaches him how to be visited by astral bodies to give him knowledge.
Look, I don't know how to say the word, but that's how you say anthroposophy, right? How do you say that?
Anthroposophy?
You can't even say. See, if Thomas can't say it, beats me, bro. Okay, so yeah, that stuff, and I think it has to do with animals or something or other. But whatever.
Anthroposophy? I don't know.
Who knows? So this is where it starts to cooking with gas, right? He's visited. You said it, not me. Visited by some spiritual being. This goes along with a lot of alchemical beliefs that when the student is ready for the magnum opus, the teacher will show up, right? There is entities in the bowels of reality, and every now and again they'll stick their head out of the cheeks of reality and go, "Hey, Thomas, are you ready for that magnum opus?"
I've seen Ace Ventura. I've seen this before. Yeah.
So they were referencing that, bro. Spread the cheeks of reality, and hey, what's going on, dude? You're good to go. Have at it. So again, beyond anything he was capable of writing. Later, he found out that during a previous visit of the elder brother, he was put to a test to determine his worthiness to be a messenger of the Western wisdom teachings. He recounts that only then he was given instructions how to reach the etheric temple of the Rose Cross near the German-Bohemian border, and how this temple was in direct communication with with and under the personal instructions of the elder brothers of the Rose Cross. The Rosicrucian order is described as being composed of 12 elder brothers gathered around a 13th who is the invisible head. These great adepts belonging to human evolution, but having already advanced far beyond the cycle of rebirth, are reported as being among those exalted beings who guide mankind's evolution. Further, some help him manifest without necessarily being under any.
That's one of my favorite parts that we get into, that there's these entities that are helping humankind, but it might be us, and then when we die, we spend 2 or 3 centuries out in the sky, and we use that to literally terraform the earth and change the earth and cause earthquakes and volcano. We'll have to get into that though. That comes in a little bit.
Well, speaking of this time. Well, not kind of this time, but L. Ron Hubbard was also on some stuff like that, right? Where they would advance in these orders and go on. And every time I think that I'm a degenerate, this chat is even more degenerate than I could ever be, right? You have they never fail to disappoint. But we have some degenerates in this show.
We are touching the cotton of the occult on this show.
Yeah, but where's your respect, everybody? What is everybody on? You know, show some respect on these serious topics, Thomas. So this is where he's at, pretty much. And a lot of people don't like that idea. I've noticed in this conspiracy round, because I guess
what idea specifically?
The idea that there are entities controlling our reality. I forgot who I was having a conversation with where they were like, not kind of really. I like that idea. It makes my nipples hard. I think that it's again, but I don't know if it was, a lot of people don't know.
It's the ultimate Illuminati, right? Like it's hard for me to believe that there's a bunch of flawed humans that have some kind of superpower, super knowledge where they're just without flaw. But if you told me that there's some kind of demiurge or like a collection of them and that's the Illuminati, I feel like that at least has more logic behind it. I'm not going to say it makes any more sense or I believe it anymore, but it has more logic compared to just like a group of people in a shadowy room somewhere.
Listen, Thomas, you can't blame other worldly entities for you being a piece of shit. Okay, you will have to come to terms with yourself and admit your wrongs.
This book argues that it's up to the true occultist to find the good in all evil, and that if you're truly like an advanced being, then you can inject so much good into evil that you turn it good again. But that if you're not an advanced being, that just the smallest amount of evil can take your good and overwhelm it, and you just kind of go with the flow. So
yikes.
I don't know, that there's a lot of interesting concepts on here that feels way outside of Christianity.
I'm such a Capricorn. No, you're just a piece of shit, right? Like whatever sign that's an asshole, right? So I believe that there are things. That's why I named my journal, which you can find on the tjojp.com or ko-fi.com/the101podcast.
And on paranoidamerican.com.
Occultist Mundy, Hidden World. I 100% believe that there are things. Now, are they us? That's an interesting concept, which we'll get into because we're going to go down this whole rabbit hole. But the magnum opus, Heindel returned to America in the summer of 1908, where he had once started to formulate the Rosicrucian teachings, the Western wisdom teachings, which he had received from the elder brothers. And he published it as a book entitled The Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception in 1909. Now, early 20th century, we also have H.P. Lovecraft. We have, during this time, they were contemporaries. We had Crowley, who was also in touch with Cthulhu or Cthulhu. These entities. But again, why was it early 20th century? And I mean, I'm sure that there are other connections, but like some of the greatest occult, and I'm not going to call them greatest, but most influential occultists were kind of in that realm. But Crowley also had theosophical influences. So it's
I got
like
an answer to that. I know it's a rhetorical question, but the answer is that if you're an occultist, right, and you hear all of a sudden people are making a fuss like, oh, Crowley's out here talking to demons and aliens and like, you know, summoning things and talking through them, it's almost like you got to raise your game, because then you got to wonder, why am I not talking to demons and aliens? And then other people are going to start asking, well, hey, Juan, how come Crowley's out here talking to aliens and demons and you're not doing any of that? Like, does he got something you don't? So I also feel like there's probably, in a very pragmatic sense and a human level, there's like a pressure now that, well, if people believe that Crowley's talking to things, like that's the new thing you got to do. Just like if I'm going to drop a book and I want the entire world to take notice, I can't just say I wrote it. But if I say, you know, some entity came down from the astral realm and bestowed this knowledge on me, so you're reading the writings of, you know, an astral being, I think that has like a better kind of marketing push to it too. So I'm not saying that's what's going on here, but I mean, I feel that, you know, marketing isn't something that got invented after the year 1920 or 1909. Marketing and all of that's been around since before any of our grandparents were born.
I'm going to have to agree with you on that one. I mean, you say a lot of ridiculous things, but that I'm going to have to agree with that one, Thomas, because yes, it does give it some sort of prestige, if you will. It does add to it where, hey, there's one thing, I'm the appointed king, right? I'm going to tell you what to do. Hey, God appointed me as king, bro. So now, like, it rings a little bit different. It's like, oh, you were appointed by God? Okay, I'm sorry. So, yeah, I think that's also a part of it. Now, Blavatsky, I haven't read any of her works. I've skimmed her works, and I think it's Isis Unveiled.
Isis Unveiled, yeah. That, if you want to talk about a book, it's like 1,100 pages or something.
It's very like...
It's got to be on the list, though, man. That one is going to be a slog, and then what? Morals and Dogma is going to be a rough one to get through, but they've got to be on the list here for this show.
Yeah. Well, eventually we'll get to it. I'm not excited. I always gauge books on, I call it the Scrotum Meter. Depending on like how much my balls hurt after reading the chapter, I know how hard it was. So in this book in particular, we only did the first 3 chapters. Chapter 1, no sensations in the scrotum area. Chapter 2, slight tingling, right? Slight tingling. And then number 3 was like, chafing. Oh, yeah, dude. There was like,
chafing, yeah.
It just sucked, right? It was a grind. And again, it's like this matter of fact attitude, like, I know this is what it is. And are you dumb? You don't know that you're on the 3rd level of the astral realm, bro? Like,
well, there's something else where when this book starts out, and you didn't read the intro, and I didn't take any notes about this part in particular because it was talking more to the reader. But the book starts out and it talks about how I've got these very complicated topics, but they're extremely important for you to understand. So I'm going to explain it in the most simple form of English, so even a layman can understand every single principle here without having any prior occult knowledge. And he starts out pretty decent in chapters 1 and 2, but then when you start turning that corner and you turn the page into chapter 3, which is the longest one of all of them, now all of a sudden every other paragraph is like, well, all occultists know, this maxim and this axiom, and I got to almost every single one thinking I've never heard that before, and that's just because it's a weird claim that was made in 1909 and never again because someone else came up with a better one. Or did he have some actual secrets that have just gone kind of undetected all this time? So I'll point a few of those out, but it leads out talking about and patting itself on the back about how easy it is going to be to read. And he kind of steers it that way, but that means that every time that they don't explain something in detail, it just kind of stands out as like, you're kind of lied about this part. Like you said you were going to explain this in detail and not leave it all to like vague abstractions, which they kind of do in a certain points.
So let me pull up a definition, right? I know we'll eventually get to Rosicrucianism, and I haven't done an actual episode on the Rosicrucians, but I want to just talk about the Rosicrucians really quickly and
their mascot is Christian Rosenkrantz, who's like a fictional sort of person allegedly that represents, like, I don't want to say like they're Jesus, but he's kind of their figurehead that represents everything that the Rosy Cross is supposed to stand for.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like their Messiah in a way. And so let me pull it up here real quick. Hold on.
And one thing too that was interesting to me was that in this book, he talks about all Rosicrucians believing that the human body is filled with a red light. and that red light is what makes blood red, and that any animals that have red blood therefore have this same sort of like supernatural cosmic energy. So I'd never heard it described in that particular way before, which was interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are based off of observation. I would call it that, right? Now, you have the crowd that obviously doesn't believe in science because it could be, my new term that I'm using is imaginary and homosexual. I'm not using fake and gay anymore. Imaginary and homosexual. So some people think that science is that it's not to be trusted, right? But again,
just science in general, just all of science. That's kind of vague itself.
No, well, not just science, but I mean, we know what happened right in 2020, and a lot of people think that. I think it's another form of religion, if you will, like this scientism, I guess you could call it, where people will.
Well, I think it's the appeal to authority. It's that classic logical fallacy, but people. Like one of the logical fallacies in appeal to authority. It's basically when you say, well, I'm a doctor, and a doctor says, or the commercials, it's like 9 out of 10 dentists, recommend this toothbrush. That's just an appeal to authority. It's like, you didn't tell me why the toothbrush was recommended, what kind of advantage this has over any other thing that's on the market. You just told me that 9 out of 10 dentists prefer it, and I should just follow them because that's the majority of the assumed professionals. But it's the same reason as when you go on like mainstream media, and they'll have like a doctor that they interview, but the doctor's got makeup on and they know how to like move their head. And I mean, they're not like a legit doctor you would go and talk to. They're a TV doctor that gets hired to do those things.
It's titled by but
that's
doctor by
the appeal
title
to authority.
Mm-hmm. So Rosicrucianism is or was spiritual and cultural movement that arose in Europe in the early 17th century after the publication of several texts announcing to the world the unknown esoteric order. Now, some people will say that Rosicrucianism was this elaborate hoax, that it was just another Q, right? I don't want to trigger any algorithm.
Yeah, but we're talking about something that the book dates back to the 1400s and
1313
even prior, right?
So I mean, and that's funny, right? Huh? It's funny you say 1313. That's a long time before the 17th century, which alleges when these manifestos came out.
It's not clear in this book what part of the information came from 1313. Just to be clear, I got the impression that a lot of this was like modern, but it would blow my mind a little bit if any of these claims that he's making date back that far. Like if we could trace specific claims that far.
And what was going on in 1313, Thomas?
That's when Jesus was born, right?
No. 13 Knights Templar, bro. Knights Templar were going on in 1313. So there I've heard the connection before. I've heard people trying to make the connection of the Rosicrucians and I've also heard that there were secret societies during the time of Jesus Christ. Like during that time there were secret occulted societies that were operating in the background and orchestrated something. So I mean that's also...
I want to mention every secret society that still exists to modern day in the West, at least, all claim that they came from the Knights Templar. Freemasons claim it. All of the various Freemason sects that come out of that, Rosicrucians claim it. Okay, maybe not every single one. Like I don't know if the OTO claims all the way back there, but I guess through like the Baphomet connection, you can almost say that anyone that integrates Baphomet would essentially be hearkening back to Knights Templar too. So, I mean, take your pick, and it feels like you could throw a dart at a board at least and have a very good chance of hitting a modern day secret society that traces themselves back to Knights Templar, because again, it gives you that clout, right? If it's like, if 9 out of 10 of the secret societies on the planet all say that they're as old as and contain the same secrets as Knights Templar, then what are you even doing if you don't claim the same thing?
Somebody said they don't trust you, bro. What do you have to say about that? This occultist Lux guy. I don't even know who this guy is, bro. This guy's...
I mean, poke and prod me, bro. Go at it. I don't care.
So, yeah, the Knights Templar, right? There's that connection there. And I've also heard people talk about that because the sign, the emblem that they use on the front of one of the first manifestos was the sign of John Dee's Monas Hieroglyphica. So they were talking about how John Dee kind of had this hand in creating the Rosicrucians. And Now I've
It's a
studied
common
John.
theme, right?
It is a common theme.
Having communication with these astral beings and bringing their information back down to earth.
Yes, and I mean, it wasn't just John D though. It was people way before him. I mean, the
But there's a lineage, right? Like it's like if you
Yes.
could imagine like a cosmic baton getting passed off.
Yes,
It kind of
yes.
goes through a very specific set of hands.
Yes, yes, and again, they all influence each other. So Trimetheus, which was the guy who was the father of modern day cryptography, and I think we talked about in the Spinozian episode, the dopamine deep dive that we did recently, a couple weeks ago, last week or something, and he was also supposedly in touch with. He had some sort of angelic magic where they were talking to angels, quote unquote. So again, there's that connection there. And so we have here, many were attracted to the promise of a, quote, universal reformation of mankind through a science, quote, built on esoteric truths of the ancient past, which, quote, concealed from the average man, provide insight into the nature and the physical universe and the spiritual realm, which they say had been kept secret for decades until the intellectual climate might receive it. Now,
that's some gatekeeping right there.
that is some gatekeeping.
Until the intellectual climate would receive it. It's like saying until all you idiots stop being such idiots, wisen up, and then we'll finally give you this profane knowledge.
And this universal reformation of mankind, well, that sounds a lot like what
New World Order.
Not only that, but think about it in an alchemical sense of it. So why were the Knights Templar? Where did the gold come from for the Knights Templar to build all those cathedrals? And if we follow Fulcanelli's teachings or his words, if Fulcanelli was even a real person, which again, early 1900s, 20th century, right? The last alchemist, if you will, he was talking about how they concealed the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, if that's even a real thing, in these cathedrals. Right, to preserve the knowledge, but only the initiated were able to extract that information. So the universal reformation of mankind through a science built on esoteric truths of the ancient past. Now, that to me screams alchemy, trying to quite literally transform the entire humanity, right? And then Masons get accused of that all the time. This magnum opus, turning the lead of man's, right, there it goes, turning the lead consciousness of man into gold, right? This higher being, if you will, right? And
I don't know anything about that.
You don't know anything about that. So
I don't know about tubal cain or any of that.
And that's just, that's all I'm going to say about the Rosicrucians, that there were this mystic group. Now it gets kind of metaphysical. Were they was it an actual group? Was it a hoax from the very beginning? Were they just trolling? Was it the first 4chan post and the dude was just trying to get whatever, just get a response from people? Who knows? We don't know. But some people follow it till today. Now
it's actually fairly large today.
It is fairly large, yes, and I know a couple of people in the Rosicrucian order. So
the light research that I did, there's like a common thread that if you want to know about actual esoteric secrets and you want to unlock sort of old alchemical text, that Rosicrucian is one of the closer ones that gets you to it. That was kind of a consensus after just contacting a few people I knew and reading up on different sort of organizations. So I don't know, it was interesting. I wouldn't advocate joining any group because there's so much you can just find online.
Chip, where is your respect, brother? The Rosicrucians, don't come with that disrespect.
Put some respect on the name.
Put some respect on these names. So
let's kick off, man. Let's kick off into the book here.
You want to do it? You want to do it, Thomas? You want to start it off?
You didn't read the introduction, so let me do the introduction.
Do the intro. I'll follow along with you.
So the book starts out and it's called A Word to the Wise. And since you didn't read this part, I guess that just implies something.
But I have the first sentence highlighted. Can I read the first sentence? Of
The Word to the Wise?
Yes.
Oh yeah, go for it.
The founder of the Christian religion stated an occult maxim when he said, whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child shall not enter therein. And then he puts Mark X15. Where is that even from?
It's a Bible quote, man. You've never heard that quote before?
No, I've never heard that quote. I've heard John where he's like, you accept my son. And
He lasers in on this and he makes a really good point, but it essentially boils down to that he comes up, man. This is one of my favorite things is when a writer's like, "There's two kinds of people in the world," because it reminds me of like a bad '90s stand up that you'd see on like Comedy Central at night. You know, like these people are like this and these other people are like that. But he comes out the gate and he's talking about there's these two main kinds of people that he's really frustrated with. So one who grasps at any new philosophy just to see how it supports their own ideas, and the philosophy itself is of minor importance. So that's this one person that just like jumps around to different religions and different concepts, and they're just constantly trying to fit things that justify what they already think of the world, but they're already kind of set in one way. Even though they're open-minded enough to read about other things, they're still just trying to back up their particular worldview. He mentions another type of person, which is the skeptic, and it says that skeptics don't have the right mental attitude with any idea they didn't come up with themselves, and they shut their mind to any truth which may be hidden, which they offhand reject. And I can kind of relate to both of these, I guess, in a way, because it's like, you know, you read a cool new idea and it's like, I don't agree with that, and sometimes you just kind of throw it out when that's just you know, filtering out for your own bias. But that second part about a skeptic, that's when, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he makes this point that children are incapable of that. Like a child, and this book defines a child as anyone 14 or younger. I think that might just be a difference because I don't know if 14-year-olds in 2023 were anything like 14-year-olds in 1909. But he's basically saying children haven't developed such a strong worldview yet that when they encounter new information, they don't put this like immediate barrier on it. It's like, oh, that doesn't fit into my worldview, because they're still forming their worldview, and they don't become as much skeptics because for that same reason, they don't just like throw it out because they haven't figured out really what makes sense to them or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what this book is basically trying to explain that Bible quote to mean, that you're never going to understand if you've already kind of grown this like hard shell around what you really think, and if you're not really open to new stuff. But that also might be because he says a whole bunch of crazy shit right after he mentions this part.
And also,
This
real
is like,
quick,
this is you. This is like your fault if you don't believe what I'm saying because you don't have eyes of a child, so you're not going to heaven type of deal.
so he says here, the Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception is not dogmatic. Neither does it appeal to any other authority than the reason of the student. It is not controversial, but it is set forth in the hope that it may help to clear some of the difficulties which have beset the minds of students of the deeper philosophies in the past. In order to avoid serious misunderstanding, it should be firmly impressed upon the mind of the student, however, that there is no infallible revelation of this complicated subject, which includes everything under the sun and above it also. And again, when I read the table of contents, I didn't know that he went there, but he goes there and he goes hard in the paint. And this is a long book. I mean, there's a lot of information, bro. And like I said,
we'll come back to it. We're going to have to jump around and come back to this one later, but I feel like there's a reason to go through this entire book at some point.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. Absolutely. So continue, please.
All right. Yeah, I got a couple others for the introduction here. So this one stood out to me. This one's somewhat verbatim. I've tried to like update a little bit just so it's easier to express. Mm-hmm. It's exceedingly difficult to retract a hastily expressed opinion. Therefore, it's urged that the reader withhold all expression of either praise or blame until the study of work has reasonably satisfied him of its merit or demerit. And the first thing I thought of was like, this doesn't exist in the world of podcasting and live streaming. You know what I mean? Like it's almost all hot takes. It's almost all instant knee-jerk reactions and then kind of like hashing it out. But he makes a really good point here. And this kind of comes up in these sort of like esoteric secret societies where like once you say something, it's impossible to take those words back. So if you say something stupid in front of someone, or bumble your words up like I just did, like you can't ever take that back, and it's just out forever. And that if you want to overcome that sort of, weakness or perceived weakness, to just don't say anything at all until you become an actual expert in something. Now, I don't think I could live my life like that, but he also mentions later on in this book all sorts of aspects of like the Great Silence. And the Great Silence in the context when he writes about it, it has nothing to do with like the typical Christian Great Silence, which is when a monk takes like a vow of silence for a certain number of years to kind of prove that, you know, they're chaste and that they're willing to go. It's almost like Fight Club, right? The dudes that stand out in front of the Fight Club for like a week until they let them come in. But you
An
got to
initiation.
put yourself, yeah, you go through this initiation. But it also felt like that the wording of that great silence harkens back to him talking about like, just don't say anything until you're fully sure of something's merit. But again, well, since this is the intro, this could be him like, yo, don't talk shit about my book until you read the whole thing.
Yeah, like don't critique it. Like
which we're gonna do, which we're gonna do right now.
I did find some reviews on it where this guy was talking about from the Christian point of view, because a lot of people don't know that I was raised Pentecostal Christian when I, you know, younger as a little boy. A lot of people don't know that on my podcast. I was raised Pentecostal Christian, but that it was too demonic for him and that he couldn't really take it and that he couldn't finish the book.
This book in particular?
Yes, this book in particular. So again, I mean, I am a researcher, right? And everything that I want to point out too, that everything that we talk about, it doesn't necessarily mean that we believe in it. We're just here. I mean, we take, what I was going to say at the beginning is that we take works like this and we extract crazy concepts. Like, people are probably wondering what the hell a cosmic snail is, a cosmic snail trail, like all these things, which we extracted from this stuff here. So
it's his favorite analogy in this, and I cut right to that, but we'll revisit again. But the snail thing is that he keeps bringing up this analogy of a snail has this, like, he mentions it almost like an ether, but this like liquid that surrounds its body. And then when it decides that it's ready to start kind of constructing a home, then it crystallizes. And the same way that slime sort of crystallizes into a hard shell that then forms the home, he kind of mentions how we've got these like etheric bodies, and then around those etheric bodies, they start to crystallize and form. He also mentions gloves, but it's almost like we're these little spirits trapped inside of these crystallized.
Condom, brother. It's a cosmic condom.
Yeah, the cosmic condom. Well, let's wait until we get to that part, because I think that analogy is going to make way more sense.
Let's wait. So
one more thing from the intro, yeah, because this is the part that stood out to me the most, and I don't know if it helped a whole lot, but he says that when he originally wrote the book in 1909, he mentions points in the body, and that within these points and vital aspects of your anatomy, this is where this like this cosmic energy kind of comes out, and it can come out in clockwise spirals and counterclockwise spirals. It could be dense, it could be thin, all depending on how much you refined your sort of like communication with this cosmic world, for lack of a better word. But he mentions in the 1929 update that he wishes the original version would have described them as prisms and not points. And it's an interesting distinction, because it's a prism going back to how they believe that there's this red light that's actually like projecting across your body, so that if there's little prisms inside these vital points, the same way that light can bounce into a prism and either, you know, consolidate and turn into another color or split up into different colors, he just mentions that the prisms being a better analogy. So I'll try my best to like mention prisms as we talk about some of this stuff.
Do you have the visuals, Thomas? Do you want to pull those up in the background so I can bring them in and out of the...
Yeah, give me a little bit.
So this idea that's very theosophical. Again, these ideas are coming from Blavatsky. Again, I don't know how much material Heindel was taking from Blavatsky, but he was being inspired by Steiner. And again, I don't know how much of a circle jerk was going on between all these people in this community, but these all stem from, right, the Eastern mysteries, right? It's very Tibetan Book of the Dead type of thing. We talk about, it gets into reincarnation, what to do in order to avoid reincarnation. Like it gets into all that kind of stuff, which is very, I consider it Buddhist, right? We don't really talk about reincarnation. I was raised Pentecostal Christian. We don't really talk. So again, very theosophical. Every feeling has a different color. Every sound has a different color. So, and is that a slideshow, bro?
No, it's a bunch of different images from the book. So I'll go through them really quick.
We have to show the diagrams too.
Well, I'll show some of them. It's just, I'll show them right now, actually. Just throw me up really quick.
All right, here you go.
So here's a distinction that he's making in the book between, we've got an ordinary man. So this is what an ordinary person would look like. And it is specific enough to, if you notice, if the energy is going clockwise or counterclockwise, that makes a difference. So this is an ordinary person, and you'll notice the difference is that this is a little bit less dense than, say, an involuntary clairvoyant. This is a person that doesn't realize, or they're not intentionally trying to become clairvoyant. They might just see things. And some of them realize that they're seeing things, and they might become mediums, and they might become kind of fortune tellers. This is paraphrasing from the book, but this is someone that hasn't really honed the ability and doesn't understand what they're doing. And then you've got a voluntary clairvoyant somewhere in here. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
So here's the involuntary, and look, the difference between an involuntary and voluntary is going to be the direction at which this energy kind of flows in and out of the body. See how it reversed? That's really the only main difference between these two. But it's still coming through all of the same points of the body, and prisms. So imagine that each of these are different prisms in your body.
It's like the 7 different chakras, right? There's 7 different points.
So there's a lot of consolidation between, like you were saying, Eastern mysticism and trying to bring it into kind of Christian mysticism. So a lot of this gets redescribed as heavens, and a lot of things get redescribed as like Christ consciousness. So this one was the interesting one, and then let me go through some of the little charts
and
here.
Real quick. I know we have a lot of people on my side, but everybody go subscribe to Paranoid American's YouTube as well, because he is streaming it on that side. Go give it a like and everything else. So yeah, we have 111 people. Make sure to sign up for the Kickstarter. I'm gonna post the link now. Make sure to sign up for the Kickstarter. Last time we have up to 50 people on the Kickstarter.
We're halfway there.
We're halfway there. So
if you just go to paranoidamerican.com, at the very top of that page, there's a link that brings you right to the Chosen One issue 2.
And so I agree with Gordy. I shout out to Gordy. I wanted to say earlier, but I was driving. I've gone through a few of my Rosicrucian books, and they kind of suck. They all say the same thing.
Well,
and a lot of like source. Trust me, bro. I talked to the elder brothers of the Galactic Federation. The Ashtar Galactic Command was trying to, I'm like, bro, what do you want, dude? Come on.
I'm glad to hear that, because this is like the first one that I've read so far, and to hear that they're all a little bit similar, I feel like, I got the Whitman sampler in a way. Like I know all the different flavors in here. So here's one of the examples, which I'll try to get into. It's going to help to have this visual as we get into it. But I mentioned that it almost felt like homework. Like I honestly felt like I was in chemistry class, or I was doing like a worksheet at certain points.
My balls were aching
trying to get through some of this. But we've got these different worlds, essentially, the 4 kingdoms, which is, we've got the pure spirit world. We've got a world of thought. We've got a desire world, and then we've got a physical world. And these charts over on the right, they're kind of, and forgive me if I bumble all of this up, but on the right here, you can see mineral, it stops at level 3 of the physical world. So it's basically incapable of having any sort of desires of itself. All of its desires kind of come from this like spirit world. And this is where we're gonna get into the Archons, and we're gonna get into like you die and your spirit goes up, and you use that to like and you can kind of like control minerals at that point. But then right next to mineral, you've got plant. So a plant at this point, it's getting closer to actually being connected to like the desire world and the desire body, but it's not quite there. Whereas the animal, it's actually partially in this desire world. The human goes all the way up here into the world of thought. And the book, and I don't know if Rosicrucian in general, but it makes these claims of that animals are not capable of higher form thought, of like an abstract thought that they can think about in their head and then bring it into, the focus of their mind and then make that into a reality. Whereas animals are just kind of acting on their immediate desires, hence this desire world, desire body. So that's one of the things that they kind of make a point of. But they also mention that us and most red-blooded animals, we still share the same spirit. It's like the exact same thing that would be inside of a rock would be inside of a person. And this reminds me of like, I don't know if it's the Gospel of Thomas, but it's like, pick up a rock and I am there, which kind of describes like spirit, like the spirit of some higher power being inside of just inanimate objects.
Yeah, and James always comes in with the fire. Animals don't have an ego; they have group souls, like these universal souls, and that's why they all act the same.
He gets into that too, where he mentions that Man, this one was fascinating to me, that if you kill a person, or like if you harm a person, you're harming an individual, and it kind of stops with that human, because the human's capable of ego, but because animals don't have ego, they have this kind of like a group consciousness. When you kill an animal, you're actually harming every animal on the planet that belongs to that group. You just harmed that group directly. But if you hurt a human, you're not necessarily hurting all of humanity directly, because we have more, I guess, agency. It breaks down a little bit for me, but that logic's explained a few times in this book.
So let's get into chapter 1, the Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception. Chapter 1, the visible and invisible worlds. And he starts right off, again, very matter of fact, the first step in occultism is the study of the invisible worlds. These worlds are invisible to the majority of people because of the dormancy of the finer and higher senses whereby they may be perceived. So I highlighted the majority of people are on a similar footing in regard to the superphysical worlds, as the man who is born blind is to our world of sense. Although the light and color are all about him, he is unable to see them. And I'm going to give this guy credit where credit is due. Yes, he'll explain to you some crazy idea, and then he'll give you the most fire analogy right after it. So you're able
to Palmer Hall influence, man. I'm telling you.
Capture what he was trying to say. I'm not saying I agree with it all, but again, to him, they are non-existent and incomprehensible simply because he lacks the senses of sight wherewith to perceive them. Objects he can feel, they seem real, but light and color are beyond his ken. So I can agree with that as far as people not being able to sense certain things. From what I've heard, I don't know, but when somebody loses their sight, allegedly their other senses become finer. They become more attuned. Like, what's that movie Daredevil where he's blind but then he can hear really well, and can do all this craziness, right? In the Book of Eli,
it was a comic too, not just a movie.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how to read, but the Book of Eli too. The whole time it was a Braille, spoiler alert, Braille Bible, and he was blind. It's like, whoa, like what the heck happened? So he goes on to say, so with the greater part of humanity, they feel and see objects and hear sounds in the physical world, but the other realms, which the clairvoyant calls the higher worlds, are as incomprehensible to them as light and color are to the blind man. Because the blind man cannot see color, however, there is no argument against their existence and reality.
It's a good point, man. It's a great point. And so he's got a couple other ones too. He's got an analogy that says, and I'm going to replace physical world with natural world because it makes more sense the way I read it that way, but it's interchangeable. To understand the natural world, which is the world of effects, it's necessary to understand the supernatural world, which is the world of causes. Just like you see a streetcar in motion, or you hear a clicking of a telegraph, again, 1909, but a mysterious force which causes the phenomena remains invisible. We say it's electricity, but the name gives us no explanation. We learn nothing of the force itself. We see and hear only its effects. So just like color or sight, just because you don't necessarily see it doesn't mean color doesn't exist. And just because you might not ever see electricity in motion, especially in 1909, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So, and he makes an even more abstract claim, which I like this one even more. And he's talking about a house, and he says that a house is yet invisible to all but the architect. He makes it objective on paper. He then draws the plans from this objective image, and the thought form, the workman, construct a house of wood, iron, or stone, which accurately corresponds to the thought form originated by the architect. Thus, his thought form became a material reality. The materialist would assert that it's much more real now, lasting and substantial than the image in the architect's mind. But let us see, because the house could not have been constructed without first the thought form, and the material object can be destroyed by dynamite, earthquake, fire, or decay, but the thought form will remain. It'll exist as long as the architect lives, and for any number of houses similar to the one destroyed may be constructed, and not even the architect can himself destroy that thought form. Even after his death, the thought form can be recovered by those who are qualified to read the memory of nature, which we'll get to later.
Yeah.
And he mentions that memory of nature thing, which blows my mind too. But this is a really interesting premise, that the abstract concept of the house is more real than the material physical version of it, because it can outlast it. And once it's out there in the open, Pandora's box way, like, you can't kill an idea. And I think that was a really cool way of putting it and making an analogy to like a house.
Yeah, and this idea, this plays directly into like my Pythagorean palace idea of where you don't know, and he says, right, those who are qualified to read the memory of nature. I mean, these are people who are remote viewers, right? We're talking about clairvoyance, whatever. And if you think of the world as a stage, as William Shakespeare, if he was even a real person, puts it, the world is a stage. Well, everybody conducting their business on this stage is charging that stage, and these clairvoyants are able to tap into your energy wherever you've been or wherever you're going to go because of this. Because when there's a building that's constructed, you don't know about the occulted scaffolding. And I mean, that's just not just for buildings. You can extrapolate that even further out. Language. We don't know the occulted scaffolding of language, of letters, like of whatever you wanted. The cartographer, right? Cartography, the cartographer is magician, the architect as magician, whatever, you name it. If they're putting their intent into it, this thought form that will forever exist, you don't know what you're carrying further. So one example that I use, King James, of the King James version of the Bible, is
shout out James.
Yeah, shout out to James, is a shady character, right? So, but it was a guy who was writing about the occult. Supposedly he was terrified.
Was he the one that was eating magical penises, or was that another one?
That was another one. Okay. One. Yeah, we're going to have that
Okay.
person on to talk. That was King Charles II, I think it was. Again, I'm not an esotericist in that. So
I'm just saying every king at some point is eating a magical penis.
Every king was probably eating penis of some sort. Yes.
That's actually when, like, after they get off the fancy chair, they go inside a little room, and in that room they eat a magical penis.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea will forever exist in this either very Akashic records-y theosophical idea.
Oh, and even if you want to get into the pseudo-sciencey aspect, this is that concept of psychometry, where if like an event happens in a room, all of the material and all the objects in that room kind of record that event. You can play it back, or some people can see it happen. So that's known as psychometry, which I think is like a cool aspect of it.
All right, so I had a few other ones up here that, let's see here, that you skipped over. He all right, so he's talking about how, why is it, and this is one of the things that I've seen as of lately, where they want to map out what they're calling, what is it, the DMT realm? It's got a name. Anyways, there's a study right now where they're putting people under DMT by IV, and they're mapping out the psychedelic realms. Now,
that sounds fun.
There is some people in the community that are like, oh no, that's demonic, and you shouldn't be doing that. I've seen it on Twitter, right? The Twitter community. And he writes about why
that DMT in particular is demonic.
Remember, when you're on DMT, there's other entities on the other side. And if you interact with that, it's demonic. I mean, remember, a lot of people don't know I was raised Pentecostal Christian, but when you're raised Christian, they tell you if it's not of Christ, then it's demonic, right? So
could you just identify it as Christ then and be off the hook?
No. I mean, I don't...
You can't say that I'm talking to God?
I mean, you bring up a good question. I mean, I know people who tell me, oh, God told me. It's like, how do you know who is? He's like, hey, it's your boy JC. Hey, dude, don't do that, bro. It's like, oh, thanks, Jesus. Like, I love you, bro. Like, we don't know,
off, dude.
Yeah, like, quit doing that, right? Like, we don't know. And I've heard people all the time like, oh, God told me. All right, hey, that's fine. I mean, if he told you, then don't do it. Whatever. So the DMT realm, they were mapping it out, and he gets into this idea of it's a different experience for everybody. And people will see things differently within this other realm. And right here, suppose a newspaper sends 20 reporters to a city with orders to ride up. Reporters are or ought to be trained observers. It is their business to see everything, and they should be able to give a good description as can be expected from any source. Yet it is certain that of the 20 reports, no two would be exactly alike. It is much more likely that they would be totally different. Although some of them might contain leading features in common, others might be unique in quality and quantity of description. So is it an argument against the existence of the city that these reports differ? So he explains this idea that it's different for everybody, and everyone's description of these higher realms or these spiritual realms differs. And then he gives you a fire-ass analogy of like, yo, that makes sense.
Thanks, I like that. Like if you send 20 people to Chicago to write about what Chicago's about, and one guy writes about a stray cat that he followed, you know, for 8 hours, and that's his article. And another one writes a restaurant, and it's like, you know, that this one place can't possibly be all these different things. So one of you guys are lying, or one of these things is incorrect, when in fact maybe they're all correct. Then there's another analogy that we've come up with before too about, it's like an old Chinese proverb or something, where there's a bunch of blind men in a room feeling up an elephant, right? And one grabs the tail, and one grabs the dick, and one grabs the ear, and they're all describing the different appendages that they're holding on to, and they're all kind of, you know, arguing, no, it's got a huge dick, or one guy's like, no, it's got like a real thin thing, you know, but they're all holding on to the same elephant, and they're all describing the same thing, but they just have different vantage points. So he's going on, and I think some of this part of this book, I get a vibe that he's trying to explain apparitions and the ghost world and a lot of the supernatural things that would be reported in the early 20th century. I think he sort of like molds and adapts some of the things that he talks about because they seem to just fit so nicely into like ghost reports.
Again, the chat never ceases to amaze me with
this is disgusting, guys. Come on.
This is disgusting. Where is everyone's respect?
We're trying to talk about Christ consciousness.
We have 118 people. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe to Paranoid American's channel. Make sure to show everybody else in the chat. I got Occultist Lux. Go check out his channel. We had Strange Brew Podcast. Make sure to check out his channel. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm having a lot of fun. And yes, bro, this idea of it's different for everybody. And I don't think I've asked you, Thomas, what are your thoughts on, you might have said at the beginning, but I don't really pay attention when you're talking to me, but what are your thoughts on the unseen world? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in Bigfoot and stuff? What are your thoughts on all that? Are UFOs real to you, or are they imaginary and homosexual as well?
It's a spectrum, man. It's a freaking spectrum.
You're on the spectrum? I know you're on the spectrum, but
they're all, yeah. I feel like if there's a spectrum, right, to like the least believable to the most believable, ghosts are probably somewhere at the least believable. And I would say like Bigfoot maybe on like the most believable to me. It's like I actually feel like there's probably undiscovered species, and I might feel that there could be, I don't know, maybe some alien type stuff. But no, I don't necessarily believe in ghosts and apparitions, and like that's why I've offered to summon a demon live with you before, but you're not man enough to do it yet. So
no. And
but
like, I love those.
He makes a good call, like a good claim throughout this book, but it still doesn't sell me on the spirit realm.
Yeah. Again, a lot of the source. Trust me, bro. You're gonna have to take my word for this. I talked to the elder brothers, Paranoid American.
Well, I didn't know this dude was on his deathbed for like 2 years on the lead up to this. So if anything,
yes,
maybe this went into his genius marketing, but it does give it a little bit more credit that a dude that's been dying for 2 or 3 years is writing about the afterlife.
And I
appeal to authority. I realize it's a fallacy, but it works.
I see Slick in the chat. You know what day this guy died, bro? In Oceanside, California. He died on January 6, 1919, okay? So we have here, Slick is somewhere in the chat. He's probably going to lose his
He's
mind.
crunching the numbers right now.
Oh, somebody's on to me, bro. Somebody said Juan is interdimensional. Yeah.
We've got the lowest form of Juan here on this particular show, though.
So, yes, he was on his deathbed from 1909 to 1919, suffering a severe heart condition and with an adverse financial situation, but was indomitable with an indomitable will and great energy. He was able to accomplish the great work of the Brothers of the Rose Cross. So he was able to pull it through and pull it together. But we have here chemical region of the physical world. In the Rosicrucian teaching, the universe is divided into 7 different worlds or states of matter.
I think that's an important distinction here, that it's not that there's like these different worlds that are separate from each other, but all the worlds, and he has an analogy about a sponge and liquid we'll get to, but all the worlds coincide at the same time. And it's just like the density of the matter in these worlds that differ, but they all overlap with each other.
Yes, they're always interacting with one another. And that kind of like, I was like, what? Right? They're bumping into each other. That's very... I know we did that episode on René Descartes, but René Descartes' mechanistic universe theory was just that there are different forms of matter that are rubbing up against each other and causing different changes in the universe or reality or whatever you want to call it. And again, this was after René Descartes, so he could have been inspired by these guys. But the 7 different worlds, the chemical region of the physical world, right? Mm-hmm. World of God, number 1. World of virgin spirits, number 2. Number 3, world of divine spirit. Number 4, world of life spirit. Number 5, world of thought. Number 6, desire world. And number 7, physical world. And you guessed it, ladies and gentlemen. Where are we? We're in the physical world, the lowest of the lowest. Very Gnostic. This body is just a cosmic condom that's holding us back from experiencing the true essence of whatever life is. And guess what? In this book, he reveals the true nature and the purpose of life. So stay put if you want to learn the true purpose of life. And you have here, the matter of these worlds also varies in density, the physical world being the densest of the 7. It always goes back to that 7, right? The 7 angels or 7 Elohim or 7 different chakras, 7 different steps of alchemy. You have, what else is 7? 7 days of the week. Give me another
7th heaven.
7th. No, give me another one. An occult, esoteric one, bro. Give me
777, bro. We've talked about the lottery machines have occult origins, and that it used to be, it used to have not a monetary sort of denomination to it.
See,
that's
Sonia gets
all
it.
been perverted.
Thank you. Sonia gets it. The cosmic condom. Exactly. We're being held back. We're being held back, and also I missed the world of thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we got here this other one over here, right here. We're just fleshlights of the elder brothers or whatever they want to call them. So, all right, here we go. Let's get serious. The 7 C's. Let's get serious. Where we at? The 3 dense subdivisions of the physical is the solids, liquids, and gases. So he's just breaking it down again because this is very... The Theosophists from
this is the homework part.
Homework, but not only that, but you have to understand that there were, especially H.P. Blavatsky, was all about the micro. So if you understood man, right, we did the occult anatomy of man, and man being this universe, this smaller universe, right, in the micro.
I feel
scale.
like that anatomy of man came from this like Manly Palmer Hall pieced the majority of that together from Rosicrucian teachings.
Mm-hmm. Yo, who the fuck is this? And I'm not Mexican, by the way. Keep them out of America. Can somebody block
He's even worse
idiot?
than Mexican, bro. You couldn't even imagine.
Somebody fucking block this idiot. I'm not on the YouTube. Let me block this retard. So he's breaking it down because there are different... Cherry, can you block that idiot? The idea of understanding man as a microcosm, and when you understand the microcosm, you understand the macro, the bigger universe, and whatever you're able to do on the micro scale, you're able to break it up in the bigger picture of things.
To all the StarCraft players out there, though, that's not necessarily true. Just because you're good at micro doesn't mean you're good at macro.
I don't know what that means. I wish I knew what that means.
That's okay.
Okay, so here we go. The careful consideration given by the occultists to the characteristics of the physical world might seem superfluous, were it not that he regards all things of the viewpoint differing widely from that of the materialist. The latter recognizes 3 states of matter: solids, liquids, and gases. These are all chemical because derived from the chemical constituents of earth. From this chemical matter, all the forms of mineral, plant, animal, and man have been built. Hence, they are as truly chemical as the substances which are commonly so termed. Thus, whether we consider the mountain or the cloud that envelops its top, the juice of the plant or the blood of the animal, the spider's thread, the wing of the butterfly, or the bones of the elephant, the air we breathe or the water we drink are all composed of the same chemical substance.
Tell me that doesn't sound like a magical spell right there. The blood of
It-
the animal and a spider's thread, the wing of a butterfly and the bones of an elephant.
Yes, and very, very grimoire, or I mean, the juice of the plant, right? The juices of the plant. And yeah, absolutely. And he's not wrong. It's like in the Full Metal Alchemist when they're trying to bring back the mom and they get all of the elements that are that make up a man, a human being, and they put it together in this transmutation circle, but they don't get it because they're missing that one thing, right? What is it? The soul. Right? That
Well,
one.
and let me point this one out because this is the part that I bolded that I think made the most sense to me. And he says that as all forms of mineral, plant, animal, and man are chemical, they must logically be dead and devoid of feeling as chemical matter in its primitive state, and the Rosicrucians assert that they are. So this is, I think, for 1909 is a pretty heavy statement. And it's kind of what Cart, Rene Descartes was mentioning, where the soul can't be in your fingers and your arm because you can chop your arm off and you've still got your soul.
But he argues otherwise.
Well, he led into the pineal gland. He read into the pineal gland.
Yeah.
But these guys are saying that it's not actually stored in some kind of physical space, that it lives in between, I guess, like the atoms or the individual components that are dead and lifeless, which I think is sort of a deviation from that Cartesian sort of philosophy that we went over in that previous book.
Yes. So let's see here. What is it then determines the confirmation? So we have 4 kingdoms, and then he breaks it down even further. The 4 kingdoms: mineral, plant, animal, and man. And I tried to bring this up the other day when we were doing that episode. Were you on there, Thomas? The Spinoza.
It doesn't matter.
Cipher. It doesn't matter.
Right? You weren't listening anyways.
Yes, exactly. But I try to bring up this mineral, this plant, and these other worlds that are occupying this same reality that we're in. And I had somebody reach out to me and they told me that there are some sects of groups, I guess, right, in the forest, shamanistic groups, if you will, that their theurgy, their magic, the thing that affects their reality are plants. And I know we were talking about the Voynich manuscript and how it was like different drawings of plants or whatever those were. But for some groups, they quite literally believe that the plants are the ones that are they're giving them that knowledge. They're the ones affecting their reality. And I mean, when you take mushrooms, kind of sort of feels like you're in a different dimension of some sort, you know? And I know you like
I don't put fungus in the same category as plants. I don't think they deserve to be in the same category. To me, fungus is way closer to animal. It's a gray line for me.
Really? Wow.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So some scientists contend that there is feeling in all tissue, living or dead, to whatever kingdom it belongs. They include even these substances ordinary class as minerals in their category of objects having feeling. And to prove their contentions, they submit diagrams with curves of energy obtained from tests. Another class of investigators teach that there is no feeling, even in the human body, except in the brain, which is the seat of feeling. So we're getting into this idea that you're talking about, where is consciousness in our stomach? Is it in our balls? Is it in your foot or whatever it is? It's like, no, well, this guy's talking about pain, but you get what I'm saying. And then he calls the brain is only the keyboard of the wonderful instrument upon which the human spirit plays its symphony of life, just as the musician expresses himself upon his violin. Wow, that was beautiful.
He's trying to get a little flowery there. But he also mentions in that same, either there or later, that if you were to take the bow of a violin and rub it against the plate, that you would see these patterns emerge. He's talking about cymatics, where you see those people that take a speaker and they'll put fluid or they'll put sand on it and play different frequencies and it turns into different patterns. He's explaining that as this kind of underlying consciousness, that those are these desire forms that can even apply to minerals. And he mentions that when ice forms on like a windowsill, it doesn't just arbitrarily frost up all the time. If you look close enough, it follows certain patterns. There's almost like a matrix or like this design construction. And really he's kind of talking about almost like skeleton diagrams of how the molecules fit together, but he's describing those patterns themselves as this like desire form, that form and that intelligence is coming from above, and by the time it makes it down to the mineral world, it's still able to express itself, but the mineral can't act on it. It just kind of like happens around it.
This is very Avatar-y, right? Yes, there are some tribes that wrap their hair around the branches of trees to connect and download knowledge, kind of like how oh yeah, as she says right there. Yeah,
Is that what those hemp necklaces are for?
I don't know, bro, but I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, the thought come from the gut before the neurons get to the thought. Mate, you are what you eat, saying comes from truth. So yeah, I've heard that before as well. And so we have here, in one sense, the physical world is a sort of model school or experiment station to teach us to work correctly in the others.
I like that one a lot. This is our preschool, right? That means that the physical world is our training like training wheels. This is like your dad holding onto the bike.
Yeah, Jesus take the wheel again. Jesus take the wheel. And then he goes on. It does this whether or not we know the existence of those other worlds, thereby proving the great wisdom of the originators of the plan. If we had knowledge of none but the higher worlds, we would make many mistakes, which would become apparent only when physical conditions are brought to bear as the criterion. And then he goes to illustrate. Again, he's going to come with a fire analogy. Let us imagine the case of an inventor working out his idea of a machine. First, he builds the machine in thought. So again, back to that architect idea. And in his mind, he sees it complete and in operation, performing most beautifully the work it is designed to do. He next makes a drawing of the design, and in doing so, perhaps find the modifications in his first conception are necessary. When from the drawings he has become satisfied the plan is feasible, he proceeds to build the actual machine from the suitable material. Now, it is almost certain that still further modifications will be found necessary before the machine will work as intended. It may be found that it must be entirely remodeled, or even that it is altogether useless in its present form, and it must be discarded and a new plan evolved. But mark this, for here is the point. The new idea or plan will be formulated for the purpose of eliminating the defects in the useless machine. Had there been no material machine constructed, thereby making evident the faults of the first idea, a second and correct idea would not have been formed. So we learn more from our mistakes than from our successes. And I kind of like going back to Manly P. Hall, Initiate to the Flame, where he talks about we are the Philosopher's Stone, and experience is that chipping away of that Philosopher's Stone, creating those facets in that stone, hence bringing forth more something out of the stone, I guess. I don't know. But yeah,
no, you want to go from having facets on the stone and having the what they call the rough ashlar and turn it into the perfect ashlar. That's where you get like the perfect Saturnian cube.
Ooh.
But I want to mention that his analogy there, I mean, if it's not overly obvious, he's talking about the reason that spirit has to come into the physical world is to like keep help refining the physical world, and therefore keep help like refining the spirit. And it's not like there's a way to get out of it, but he also meant, and I don't know if we're going to get all the way into the details, so here it makes the most sense, but there's a few places in this book where he mentions that first, when you're sort of in the heavens, either in the first or the second heaven, then you've got a way to help shape the earth so that when you return back to earth again in the physical form, it reflects a completely different reality, whether that's terraforming things, creating mountains, making volcanoes go off, flooding places, making deserts, like all these different aspects. You're actually changing the entire makeup of the earth, so when you go back again, you can have a completely different experience. But then he mentions that as your matter's kind of dropping through these different worlds into the physical world, you're almost like being able to decide like what you want to grab and reconfigure yourself. And then he even mentions that as you're a fetus in the womb, you're consciously making decisions and like adapting to information that you're bringing back from your previous life or whatever information you might have discovered in that initial fall into the physical world. And you've got sort of this short amount of time until you're born to kind of like finish every little tweak. And that's that aspect of first you think about it, you know, that's the architect drawing the thing in his head, where it's in this like thought form world. And as it goes into that physical world, in the invention analogy, it's like at each stage or each world or each phase of matter, you have another opportunity to kind of tweak it and make it better based on the rules of that kind of realm.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, and it would make, but the thing that I don't like about that is that this existence that we're living in now, again, back to very Gnostic ideas, is this sort of homework, this sort of chore, and you are doing your best to break free from it, right? But again, I mean, to each their
I don't know.
own.
I don't know if I read it that same way, because he makes a
That's
good
the way I interpret
argument.
it.
Well, it's okay to interpret things wrong. That's why I'm here. So, I'm just kidding. But he makes a case that a lot of people that start getting into this like high spiritual, like philosophical stuff, you get into this like Rosicrucian, you find out that there's these 6 other worlds, and there's a silver cord that connects you to your cosmic spirit body, and that's where the snail trail comes from, and we'll get into all that. But that doesn't mean you should devalue the material world, and you shouldn't devalue the physical world, and that we have to experience the physical world through our physical senses, because that's the language of this very dense reality. But you don't want to discount it, because that entire sequence of events of this matter falling through those worlds and getting down to the physical world, this is like if you got your ticket and you waited in line to go on, you know, Space Mountain. Like, physical world is getting into the roller coaster and riding Space Mountain, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And getting off of it. And that's when you're going back and you get back into the line, you're like, do I want to sit in the front of the car next time? Do I want to sit in the back of the car? Do I want to take a break and go get a snack? And he kind of mentions that this is sort of like this weird reincarnation thing where you almost get to decide what body you want to live in or what kind of life you want to lead, but it's not based on you die and you're like, okay, next time I want to be rich, you know, I want to have a yacht and I want to like just be born into money, or I want to be famous. It's more like once you get into that spiritual realm, you don't care about all the material stuff anymore, and it's like, what experience do I need to round out my overall being, or like what crazy shit haven't I got into yet? And then you just steer everything. You know, I haven't been a Cambodian, you know, single mom before, so maybe that's going to be my next experiment. And it has nothing to do with your limbic system or like the physical pleasures. These are decisions that you're making when you're already sort of like elevated. And it doesn't sound like there's a way to get out of it. Everyone has to go through this process.
So he gets into the etheric region of the physical world. So we're diving. Do you have he has a chart for this particular thing, right? The 7 different layers of I think you showed it earlier, but
pull back up.
The etheric region of the physical world. As soon as we enter this realm of nature, we are in the invisible, intangible world where our ordinary senses fail us. Hence, this part of the physical world is practically unexplored by material science. And I have to agree with him. I think this is what, people go, oh, quantum is just another fancy. I think this is what quantum physics is all about. It's another word for the occult. I think 100% that it's another way of changing up the same term, right, that the alchemists used back then, and just giving it a fancy title. And the alchemists are these guys with the white lab coats on. So where are we at? We're in the physical world. All
the way at the bottom. It goes from least dense to most dense. Mm-hmm. And if you look, that there's like 7 little within each kingdom. This is where the algebra starts coming in. So within each kingdom, there are 7 different steps, and the bottom 3 steps versus the top 3 steps, they indicate sort of like a needle moving towards one step or the other, whereas the middle one is kind of neutral, and that's where you see mineral is kind of neutralizes, where it can't like elevate itself into the next worlds and vice versa. It's just like this downward pattern. And then we've got some other interesting ones here. So you've got the physical world at the bottom here. And if you start at the very, very
beginning
right
of serious life, Thomas, you're not there yet.
So this is a good one. So here's like the ego, right? This is we're gonna sort of step in and say spirit, ego, whatever you want to call this. It's kind of recycling through all of these different worlds. So it starts all the way up here at the world of abstract. It goes down into concrete thought. Then it gets this desire world. So this is where it desires to actually have a body within the physical world. And here's where you actually turn into a human being. So you've got your birth of your dense body. That's our physical body, the skin condom, the cosmic glove that we're kind of wearing. And then there's all these different steps, right? So at age 7, you've got the birth of your vital body growth. There's going to be a pop quiz at the end of this. There's the birth of the desire body, which is puberty. And again, he marks this at 14. There's an interesting note here where he actually mentions that but before age 14, you're still being supplied by, I guess, hormones that come from your parents. They kind of like get stored up in your gland. I don't want to misquote which gland it is. But that like once you hit the age 14, roughly enter puberty, you start producing all of these hormones for yourself. They no longer come from your parents. So that's where they kind of make this argument. There's like a scientific correlation to this particular year when the human body actually starts producing all of its own nutrients and chemicals. And then once you go beyond age 14, you double that. This is the beginning of your serious life. And I noted this is when I started Paranoid American, was at age 28. I don't know if that's just a coincidence or what. But as you go, and then they basically assume that you're going to die around 50, I guess.
Is that 33 right there?
33 here, or maybe it might be 35. I'm not really sure. It's really hard to tell.
What do you think of this comment? The person's named Zaza Demon with the picture of AOC. So Joker was being meta when he said that. He told Batman that he's less than human. Why so serious? So yeah, look at Andrea. Yeah, Andrea, you can watch us both. I mean, I love Longo. He's my dad. But yeah, you got a tough choice because I put out fire too. So, yeah, and you're skipping to chapter 3. So I want to.
Well, you wanted a fancy chart, so I got you.
Yeah. I meant the first one. Okay. And then he goes on. Air is invisible, right? We're talking about the etheric region of the physical world. Air is invisible, yet modern science knows it exists. By means of instruments, its velocity as wind can be measured by compression. It can be made visible as air. So he's talking about like all these different apparatuses that they use to. He calls them wizard of the laboratory or laboratory, however you want to say it, and how there are things to measure this thing that we don't see, but we feel. And I think that's an argument that a lot of people use when it comes to religion, because they feel it, therefore everybody else needs to feel it as well. And I mean, to each their own. Like, just because source, trust me, bro. Again, I'm not saying that I haven't felt the Holy Spirit. I have felt something at church that once the congregation is going and they're doing their whole thing, because a lot of people don't know I was raised Pentecostal Christian, but that's besides the point.
The priest went to jail for that, though.
Yeah, so man has within himself faculties which eliminate distance and compensate for lack of size to a degree as much greater than the power of telescope and microscope as theirs exceeds that of the naked eye. Okay. That sounded really wrong.
He also makes some claims in here that you can train your eye to see better than the best microscope, which...
No. But, hey, I had an optometrist on, an eye doctor, an eye surgeon, and he told me the same thing, bro.
Really?
He told me that that's what they don't want you to know, that you're able to train your eyes to see better. But, again, it's
a microscope?
It's a whole industry, Thomas, of glasses. So why would they? It goes back to the pharmaceutical and
why are you feeding the beast then, man? Take the glasses off right now. Let's fight back.
I don't know how to do this esoteric stuff. Like, how are you supposed to train your eyeballs? You're supposed to do push-ups with your eyes or something. And he didn't tell me how to do it, but he said that you technically could train your eyes to see. I have astigmatism, bro. I don't know. So we have here, man has...
It's a bold claim. I'm saying it's a bold claim to say that you can train your eye to see better than a microscope. Although I've been to Ripley's Believe It or Not, and I've seen the dude that drew, did the whole Lord's Prayer on a grain of rice. So yes. I guess it's possible. And he was in a jail cell, so he didn't have a microscope.
These senses or faculties are the mean of investigation used by occultists. They are their open sesame in searching for truth. You have chemical ether. This ether is both positive and negative in manifestation. I don't know if you want to get into all this because he starts to break these things down.
We got a lot, dude. We're on page 12 of 50 of notes here. So
All right, take the helm, bro, because I have a whole bunch of this. So he goes through the different.
We got chemical ether, we've got life ether, and he mentions that in life ether that forces work along a positive pole, which is like the female during gestation, and that they enable a female to do positive active work to bring forth a new being. This is the
In the
positive
kitchen.
energy.
Yeah.
And that the negative pole enables men to produce semen. That's what the negative part does. He mentions light ether, and that this is what generates the blood heat. This is what, like, you know, raises your body temperature. He also mentions that plants don't have this particular facet, and this is one of the things where I looked up, because there is something called thermogenic plants, which do generate their own heat. Some of them do it to attract flies. Some of them do it for a bunch of different reasons, but there absolutely are plants that can generate their heat, but it works on slightly different principles. And I said, do you have the cucumber clip? There's a cucumber.
Am I gonna get flagged for it?
We might get flagged, but screw it, man. So I
don't want to get flagged. All right, hold on.
Just do it, man.
YouTube, what's it called? Squirting cucumber?
Squirting cucumber. And this is a video from the Smithsonian, but there's absolutely plants that generate their own heat. One of them is called the squirting cucumber, and it basically generates a bunch of seeds through negative life ether, I guess. And when it generates enough heat, it creates a pressure that just expels all the seeds.
Listen. Yes. I had Jay Widener tell me that animals, and I've always wondered about this. He says that there's a way, because there is an etheric body. He talked to us about that. That is, a certain amount of inches off your skin that keeps you warm. But he also talked about how that's why you see foxes that are in these Arctic regions, that when you look at them, you go, damn, that fox must be cold. But he's like, no, these animals generate their own heat energy field. If you look at Wim Hof does something like that similar too. Like, he'll generate he climbed Everest in shorts and like no shoes on. How bananas is that? Is there something you're able to train in your body that's able to let you do this? You know what I'm saying? Like, do you have the video?
You're taking forever. This is important.
All right.
We don't have the sound, but we've
okay.
got the visual.
All right, so everybody watch this cucumber squirt.
This is an example of a thermogenic plant, which apparently was not popular in early 1900s.
And by the way, Thomas got a strike on Twitter for this.
Yeah, I posted this and it was taken down for not being appropriate.
I mean, yeah, sure, but yeah, that's another way of wow. Okay.
So all that to say that there definitely is examples of plants that could, in theory, be making use of this light ether that that they describe. The next one is a reflecting ether, and this is an idea of the house which existed in the mind. And this is where he brings up this memory of nature. And to me, the memory of nature, you mentioned already, is kind of like the Akashic records. This is where, like, the idea already exists out there, and you're actually using a certain type of ether that lets you pick up on that thought form that already exists out in the world, I guess.
So we have light ether. What else? We have reflecting ether.
Those are the four ethers. You've got chemical, life, light, and reflecting. And then he gets into the desire world, where they also have like these different similar regions. Yeah,
7. So I like that one. I didn't see that chart that you pulled up, but it always goes. So you have the 7, and then boom, you have another 7. And then what was it? Manly P. Hall, the 7 seals of interpretation of like scripture or whatever it was. So there's always that 7.
I'd still love that, his interpretation of 7 seals, that in order to understand an occult topic, you have to understand it in 7 different capacities. And here I do have an image here. Let me see.
We have the desire world. The desire world has 7 subdivisions called regions, but unlike the physical world, it does not have the great divisions corresponding to the chemical and etheric regions. So yeah, of course. Max.
So here we are on the far left, going to the far right. And then if you notice in the second little row here, each of these worlds has 7 different regions.
Where's the curve, Thomas? If I can see the boat all the way at the end, if I zoom in, where's the curve, bro?
I don't even know, man. I don't even know the answer to where the curve is. Honestly, those ones frustrate me because like I didn't like school and I didn't like that aspect of trigonometry and calculus and all that. So it's like when I do these podcasts, I want to talk about a little bit of woo-woo, a little bit of magic. Don't make me get out my TI-85 calculator and start doing graph problems. It gives me PTSD.
Yeah, it does give me PTSD too. So
But you can see here that the region of abstract thought and the region of concrete thought, this is sort of like the world of thought forms. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. And then these are these different regions. So see on the left here is the actual idea, which doesn't come from you. This isn't happening in your mind. This idea exists outside of you. This is that like reflective ether. And this is that Akashic record, right? This is the book that you're about to check out from the Akashic library. And then right here in the middle of the mind, this is kind of this neutral zone. So there's right down this middle of this like fourth region in this concept of thought, there's this constant battle that he describes about repulsion, like rejection and acceptance, or like positive and negative. So you might be coming across countless ideas constantly out in the world without even knowing it. And in certain aspects, your mind determines, I'm going to latch onto that idea and I'm going to bring it into reality. So for this example of like, I'm going to build a boat, right? The idea floats out there. It gets into your mind. You decide to give it focus. It turns into a thought form, which is now it's like actually in your mind. You've taken it from the outside world into your kind of inner world. And then you use desire to bring that into the physical world. So that's why it starts as an idea. It turns into a concrete thought, like I'm going to do this thing. Then your desire to make that thing a reality is what brings it into this physical world. And so almost every single creative endeavor goes through this.
And that is what these occultists are trying to do, but they're trying to skip steps, right? They're trying to avoid all these other steps and everything else. And I've talked about it, right? I mean, this guy's hitting on a lot of these topics that I didn't make them up, but this idea of manifestation, it's in your mind, it's in the ether. Are your ideas from the get-go? Because when you get an idea, I mean, you know about ideas, right? Sometimes we write comics and we write stories and all these different things. When you come up with an idea, is it yours to begin with? Or was it divinely inspired? Or was it, again, one of the elder brothers, right, planting their seed in your mind, right? Because he gets into that as well towards the...
I think it might be like a finders keepers rule here in the physical world, right? So like, even if it's not your idea, if you went out and found it, it's like, this is mine, you know, and then you kind of get the IP rights and you can start licensing it out to people and send your goons after anyone that's trying to do the same thing. But I don't, if that's not a rhetorical question, no, I don't think any idea is unique to the person. And this chart sort of backs it up, at least in the terms of this Rosicrucian work. These ideas exist outside of us and like our little ego physical bodies here. This is what you would need to actually bring that into being. But yeah, like nobody owns anything that's ever existed in the material world.
Whoa. Yeah. And then that's Jung's concept of the collective conscious. Yeah. So,
and if you notice this bottom part too, this is where he tries to adapt it to like the technology of the day. So he's got a stereo opticon. But yeah, so you've got, so the will is kind of like the the main source of God. That's what he describes as will here. So on the bottom, this is almost like in a projection house, right? Like a movie theater. Here's your projector. Then you need to have the light, which actually is the medium which projects those colors. Here's the slide. So like, again, like the picture that you're seeing on the screen, it's not coming from the screen. It's coming from a tiny little slide that's outside of your view, right? It's way above your head. It's behind you in the projector booth. And then here's the lens of the actual projector. Here's the actual point in time when you decide that you're going to take this slide image that doesn't exist, pass it through a medium, and now you're projecting it, and then finally it goes out into the screen. I like how he just kind of skips through, like, you know, the concrete world of thought and the desire world. It's like, oh, there's a bunch of light rays there. Bam.
Yeah. So to recap, the chemical region is the realm of form, and the etheric region is the home of the forces carrying on life activities in those forms. Okay, enabling them to live, move, and propagate. So the forces in the desire world working in the quickened dense body impel it to move in this or that direction. So we're quite literally right now breaking down the fabric of reality and why you do certain things. And it's all, again, it starts in the micro and it grows outwards into the macro to where you are now. So we're made up of chemicals, right? We're a whole bunch of chemicals put together. And then there's this etheric region that's moving everything around. Again, it's very Gnostic because the Gnostics assigned a different demon for every different bodily function. In the Book of Enoch, you have a different angel for every part of the body that makes up man, right? And they're all working together. So we're kind of talking about the same thing, but just from a Rosicrucian lens. And the desire world is the one that impels you to move in whatever. So it's the soul essence, kind of, sort of, not the ego. I mean, we get into that, but that's the way I interpret it, right? If you have no motivation, right, there's no desire. I mean, I know the name isn't exactly what it's supposed to mean, but you get what I'm saying. Come on. And so right here, if there were only the activities of the chemical and etheric regions of the physical world, there would be forms having life able to move, but with no incentive for doing so. And I mean, this could be some people, right? The NPC theory. Some people are probably lacking this desire world. I don't know. I mean, they're just vessels, I guess. I mean, that's kind of mean, but I think
they got too thick of a condom on, basically.
Exactly. Peel back some layers, bro, right? Take some off. We have evolution would be an impossibility both as to form and life, for it is only in response to the requirements of spiritual growth that forms evolve to higher states. Thus, we at once see the great importance of this realm of nature. Okay.
So that's an interesting dynamic, though, about Christian mysticism embracing the concept of evolution, because he also mentions later on in chapter 3 that that in like millennia from now, or I think it's way more than millennia, but in like millions of years, animals will actually evolve to have human style consciousness. They won't necessarily, a dog might not turn into a person, it might not become bipedal and like lose all of its fur, but that over enough time, all of these, even that rock at a certain point is going to gain consciousness on a long enough timeline.
And James here, Rosicrucian is not Gnostic because they believe the Logos was the creator, hence they are Christian. Which, I mean, that is a distinction. If they believe that the Logos, to some sects, was a force, right? The Stoics believe that the Logos was just a force, and whatever happened. And then the Christians, or whoever else, right, they believe that the Logos was a personal connection with that thing. So it was a more personal experience.
And the Gnostics too would, I think they typically have that aspect of the demiurge, which is not present in this sort of Rosicrucian breakdown.
They believe in God, and
they don't have that like broken filter, right?
Yeah. In Rosicrucianism, they believe that there is like this Godhead, right? But then they also believe that there's like these entities that control reality. And they don't
we got to get to that. We got to get to that.
We'll get to that. So here we go. Unfortunately, our language is descriptive of material things and therefore entirely inadequate to describe the conditions of the superphysical realms. Hence, all that is said about these realms must be taken tentatively as similes rather than actual descriptions. So it's like he's talking about how there's different descriptions for these realms, but then it's like, hey, our language, you can't even comprehend these other realms, and you can't even, so just take it for whatever it's worth. And
which is a little contradictory to that opening statement where he's like, I'm gonna break everything down to a layman, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, if you don't understand this, then you're not a true esoteric occultist. Like, I never said I was. I picked up this book because you promised to explain it in layman's terms,
No, but you need to read the whole thing, Thomas, before you can even critique it, bro.
That's right.
You need to become an expert in it. You need to become an expert in it in order to understand it, okay? So the law of matter of the chemical region is inertia and the tendency to remain in status quo. It takes a certain amount of force to overcome this inertia and cause the body which is at rest to move or stop the body in motion. So,
and that this is unique to the physical world. That's an important distinction, is that inertia and stopping and remaining at rest, or being in motion, remaining in motion, only happens in the physical world. And when you're in these other realms where it's just energy, or just this, cosmo astral worlds, that you're constantly in motion, that all of those laws of gravity and physics and inertia no longer apply. It's only in this most dense region that those worlds have their own sort of sets of rules.
Yeah, and then it goes, not so with the matter of the desire world. The matter itself is almost living, and it is in an unceasing motion fluid, taking all the imaginable and unimaginable forms with inconceivable facility and rapidity. At the same time, coruscating and scintillating in 1,000 ever-changing shades of color, incomparable to anything we know in this physical state of consciousness. And he goes, that is what the desire world is, ever-changing light and color, in which the forces of animal and man intermingle with the forces of innumerable hierarchies of spiritual beings, which do not appear in our physical world, but are as active in the desire world as we are here. Some of them will be dealt with later, and their connection with man's evolution described. So it's what you were talking about at the beginning. It's just a shit show of worlds and material just rubbing up against each other. There's this cosmic orgy, if you will, that is happening and outside of what we can perceive and not perceive. So the
quick, you're in the 4th region of the desire world, and you need to move into the 7th region of the thought form world. How many regions do you need to this is where it started getting very algebraic, Dewey.
Yeah, and now again, very matter of fact, and that's why I was like, to arrive at a correct understanding of the desire world, it is necessary to realize that this is the world of feeling, desires, and emotions. These are all under the domination of two great forces, attraction and repulsion, which act in a different way in the 3 denser regions of the desire world, from that in which they act in the 3 finer or upper regions, etc., etc. The central region is of feeling, and the finest and rarest substance of the okay.
Let me rapid fire a few, because we need to get at least in the chapter 2 here. So he breaks at the very end of chapter 1. He breaks down the world of thought. We went over the desire world, the chemical region, the world of thought. He has as a continental region, which is the lowest subdivision. This is like sort of archetypes that are fashioned just like continents and isles of the world. Then he talks about an oceanic region where things are constantly flowing. He talks about an aerial region, and then a region of archetypal forces. And instead of breaking every one of those down, he comes up with a really interesting analogy of a sponge. So I want to end, and all the flat earthers are going to get triggered here, because he describes it as a spherical world. But his analogy here is you basically take a round sponge, right?
You're in the world of thought, right?
We're in the world of thought right now. Yeah.
All right.
You take this spherical sponge. Well, he's going to describe all of them combined now, all together. So the spherical sponge represents a dense earth, which you would consider the chemical region. So imagine that this sponge, right? You've got like a sand that's all inside the sponge. It's still a sponge, but it's filled with sand and all of the pores on the inside. So all of those different layers of sand are also kind of like outside the sponge too, almost like a crust of earth. So that sand represents the etheric region, which kind of permeates the earth, although it isn't the earth. It doesn't displace the earth. It just kind of like the sand goes inside of the sponge. That fills up the earth with this ether. Then it says you further take this sponge, which is covered in sand, and immerse it into a spherical glass vessel with clear water, a little larger than the sponge. And when you put that inside the water, it's almost like a yolk going inside of an egg. And you've kind of got like the snot on the outside, right? The white of the egg. And we're talking about the yolk right now. So now all of that sort of that clear water between the sand and the vessel, that represents the desire world. And then he keeps going above and above and keeps adding like layers around it. He also mentions this in reverse, as matter comes from the high realm and falls down into the physical realm, that each time it goes through a layer, it kind of gets wrapped with like another glove or another condom, as you mentioned, like a cosmic condom. So as it comes all the way down, by the time you get into the physical world, it's got all the other worlds kind of wrapped up inside of it.
They're going to freak out when you said, what'd you say, spherical, bro?
Well, it's a spherical sponge, and they put it in a spherical vessel. they mention that it's inside of an egg. So there's a lot of, if you want to read into the symbolism, although I don't think we've got time for every single symbolic link here. There's so much more to cover here.
I'll read the last paragraph. In a manner similar to that in which the world of life spirit correlates us to the other planets in our own solar system, does the world of divine spirit correlate us to the other solar systems. We may regard the solar systems as separate sponges swimming in a world of divine spirit, and thus it will be apparent that in order to travel from one solar system to another, it would be necessary to be able to function consciously in the highest vehicle of man, the divine spirit. Now, I'm going to say it again, very Gnostic, because the Gnostics believe that every single different celestial body and its celestial orbit was a different dimension. So again, they might be Christians, quote unquote, mystic Christians, whatever, but where did Christianity sprout from? From Gnosticism. And I mean, since I started out with Gnosticism, because, I was born and raised Pentecostal Christian, a lot of people don't know that, but the idea that I studied that cosmology quite in detail, and I can see the correlations. And I'm not going to get into it on this episode, but I'm going to be doing an episode with Mario from Symbolic Studies soon. And I'm going to talk about outer space. I know it's not, some people think it's fake and gay, but I want to talk about it because I think it serves an important role.
My impression from this book is that even if you went to Saturn, then Saturn still has a physical aspect, but that means that all of those other worlds and regions also exist on Saturn, like the whole ether. Like it doesn't only happen on the planet Earth. This happens through all of physical reality. So that like these rules that he's laying out exist in infinite space. Like there's not a planet you could go to that has a physical representation where this doesn't still play out.
So chapter 2, the 4 kingdoms, mineral, plant, animal, and human kingdoms. Man moves, grows, and propagates his species. The mineral in its native state does none of these things. And he breaks down what the different kingdoms do. And you can take over, Thomas, and kick it into overdrive.
Well, so he does an intro here that I think is worth reading. It says, to function in any world and express the qualities peculiar to it, we must first possess a vehicle made of its material. So in order to function in the dense physical world, it's necessary to have a dense body adapted to that environment. Otherwise, we should be ghosts, as they are commonly called, and be invisible to most physical beings. So we must have a vital body before we can express life, grow, or externalize the other qualities peculiar to the etheric region. And this, again, the cosmic condoms is the best example of this, as it's like falling down and getting other. He also mentions like a person putting on gloves that we'll get into. And he says that to show feeling and emotion, it's necessary to have a vehicle composed of the materials of the desire world. And the mind formed of the substance of the region of concrete thought is necessary to render thinking possible. And this, again, was that delineation between like animals and plants and minerals, that they don't have a vehicle that can live inside of the concrete thought world. They just don't have the capacity. I don't know if I agree with that. That's just what the book was kind of spelling out as delineating, all these different kingdoms of mineral, plant, animal, and man. And then he also says, in addition, consequent upon the action of the third light or ether, the animal has the faculties of generating internal heat and sense perception. And that's where I was like, wait a minute, there's the Eastern skunk cabbage, there's the Victoria, there's the squirting cucumber. These ones all do generate internal heat, so it kind of breaks that aspect of his rule. But he has a whole bunch of really cool stories in this chapter. So instead of taking all of the algebra notes, which I was kind of zoning out, I really honed in on his analogies and his stories.
Yeah, do that then, because I have a whole bunch. I want to point out here that I think it was Marsilio Ficino, which was responsible for the Neoplatonic revival during the Renaissance. They got into this concept of, again, mind you, this was during the Renaissance, and they talked about having soul vehicles, and that's what the geometric shapes are, where you're able to ascend through different dimensions in the soul vehicle. And then they got into like the ethics of it. Like if you create a soul vehicle and once you get to heaven, like, do you take your soul vehicle with you, or do you abandon it? It's like there are a whole bunch of abandoned soul vehicles.
What kind
in
of
heaven.
trim we talk? We talk like the touring trim or what?
Yeah, like, you know, like
Sports package.
they got into all that, like the like how you would go about creating it, like what color was it. So this is an actual thing that was going on and an idea in antiquity, not just Mr. Heindel here, but again, you see where they get their ideas from, right? And throughout history.
So he mentions ghost limbs, which is one of my favorite topics too, because of that Cartesian thing. But his is a little bit looser. I'll jump around a little bit, but he mentions that he explains ghost limbs as being this separate vital body that exists independent of your physical body. So when the etheric counterpart of the amputated limb will gradually disintegrate as the dense member decays, but in the meantime, a man will possess that etheric limb, and that's what explains like you being able to have, you know, feel your fingers move around or your arm move around. It's because this etheric version of your body is still attached to you, and only over a long amount of time will it go away. And he goes in a little bit further. This one is where he lost me. I made a little note. It's like, you're losing me, dude. But he's got a story about the nail in the coffin, and it says, and this again, it gets into like Ripley's Believe It or Not land, or just kind of like a funny story you'd read in like the back of a cereal box almost. But it's that there's a connection with a buried member, irrespective of distance. There's a case on record. He doesn't mention any names or dates or anything. Just there's a case on record where a man felt a severe pain as if a nail had been driven into the flesh of an amputated limb, and it persisted until the limb was exhumed, when it found that a nail had been driven into it at the time it was boxed for burial. The nail was removed, and the pain instantly stopped. Ooh. So at this point, and then he says, it's also in accordance. Yeah, no, hit it, blast it.
He was feeling his etheric arm.
It's also in accordance with these facts that people complain of pain in a limb for perhaps 2 to 3 years after an amputation. The pain will then cease. This is because a disease remains in the still undetached etheric limb, but as the amputated part disintegrates, the etheric limb follows suit, and thus the pain ceases. So he's basically saying that if they chop your arm off, and you had like pain in your arm, it's going to take as long as that arm takes to decay and just wither away and get eaten by worms for your ghost limb to go away. And that there's almost like a 1-to-1 correlation between the time it takes. And later on in the book, he actually advocates for cremation and not burying your dead because of this process, that you don't want somebody to be trapped with their etheric, you know, sort of body, or their etheric body parts still existing out there. And I think he mentions it's like a few days, like you only need 3 or 4 days, and then you can cremate a body, but you don't want to cremate it before the 3 days are up, because then like your etheric body doesn't get the signal, or like, you know, it might be out of town on vacation and it comes back and like its house is gone, which we already found out you don't want. That's when like the homunculus comes and steals your body and flies.
You said it, not me. So,
but I don't know. I thought that was an interesting take on ghost limbs and all this.
I want to add, you skipped my favorite part. There are certain cases where the vital body partly leaves the dense body, such as when a hand goes to sleep. Then the etheric hand of the vital body may be seen hanging below the dense arm like a glove, and the point causes the peculiar pricking sensation felt when the etheric hand re-enters the dense hand. Sometimes in hypnosis, the head of the vital body divides and hangs outside the dense head, one half over each shoulder. So he's talking about like you can see like this etheric, like they go to see, like you see their regular head, but then you see the etheric one like hanging down or whatever. And I'm just like, whenever I'm on the toilet for a long time, my legs go to sleep. So I can just imagine like my legs are just like, you know, like hanging out, because hey, according to Heindel, he says that it's when it exits and you gotta kind of wake it back up, right? He says it hurts. The absence of prickly sensation at awakening in cases like this is because during the hypnosis, part of the hypnotist's vital body had been substituted for that of the victim. Interesting. Okay. So and then he talks about when you give somebody anesthesia, the vital body is partially driven out along with the higher vehicles. And if the application is too strong in the life ether is driven out, death ensues. So he's talking about like, yo, You give people too much anesthesia, and you're driving that etheric body out of the body, and that's a no. And
Well, he gets into that too. I mean, that the quote of like sleep is the cousin of death. He doesn't mention that by name, but he hints at that when you go to sleep or when you die, the same sort of thing happens. That there's this silver cord that connects you to your etheric body, and that when you sleep, it can get severed essentially, but it's just temporary, and it comes back when you gain consciousness. But when you're dead, it gets severed and it doesn't come back. But there's ways that you can help facilitate this little silver cord. There's ways you can screw up and chop it off and turn yourself into a ghost. I mean, I'm oversimplifying some of that, of course.
Yeah, and let's take this into consideration right here. No genuinely developed seer will ever exercise this faculty for money or its equivalent, nor will he use it to
how much was this
gratify
book?
curse, but only to help you.
How much did he
only
charge
to
for this
help,
book?
but only to help humanity. Thomas, are you helping humanity? Yes or no? Answer the question, bro. If you're helping humanity, it's okay. You can do whatever you want. So, where you at? The desire body is rooted in the liver, as the vital body is in the spleen.
And then he talks about reptilians. so let me pull on the reptilian aspect where he says this is the very next statement after the desire body is rooted in the liver and the vital body is in the spleen. It says that when there's vitality and motion but no red blood, then there's no separate desire body. And again, that desire body was that like flowing of energy and that like little egg shape. It almost looked like a little hairy dude floating out in space. And that the creature is simply in the transition stage from plant to animal, and therefore it moves entirely in the strength of a group spirit. We mentioned this before. And that in cold-blooded animals, which have a liver and red blood, there's a separate desire body, and the group spirit directs the currents inward, because in their case, there's a separate spirit of an individual fish or a reptile, for instance, that's entirely outside of the dense vehicle. So this is like this transition period where it's not just entirely this group spirit, but also like an animal might be developing its own individual spirit. And this is another thing that delineates humans from animals, that humans have completely developed their own internal spirit and they no longer have a group spirit. I guess this is, like, did I cross the two or do I carry the one?
And then this is an interesting question. Does this mean that Geronimo's skull and mummy still feels? Because again, we're talking about the separation of limbs, and yikes.
I mean, he advocates for cremation for that exact reason.
And Manly P. Hall, they said that they waited 3 days to cremate him because of his belief, supposedly. But
what about those Buddhist monks that like mummify themselves? Are they just screwing themselves over, and now they're stuck like as like a little ghost in their little trapped shell until that disintegrates? And what if they preserve it forever, like
no. What? Yeah. Well, if we're following this cosmology, they would be trapped. But according to that cosmology that they believe in, once if you don't rot after the fact, you did the whole thing right, and you achieve nirvana or whatever it was, and you escape samsara, and they worship you, so you become a talisman. So it's very interesting. But yeah, that's a whole nother episode. And the mammalia of today are on a higher plane that was man at the animal stage of his evolution, because they have warm red blood, which man did not have at that stage. So he's going on here. And then this was interesting here. The liver also one who lives. And he's talking about like the etymology of the liver and the life of the organism, right? Because they said that the liver filters the blood, right? Is that the main thing that it does?
Well, he mentions that the liver is named because that's where the source of life comes from. So it has the word live inside the liver. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, where was it that they pierced Jesus with the spear of destiny? Was it on the liver, or was it the spleen?
I skipped that class.
Okay. All right. Well,
it was in his side. I know that.
Thanks for nothing, Thomas. Thank you for nothing. All right. So let's move on here.
Well, there's an animal consciousness aspect, which to drive this in, because I find this is one of the most interesting parts. And he says, we know some animals think, but those are the highest domesticated animals which have come close into touch with man for generations, and thus have developed a faculty not possessed by other animals, which have not had that advantage. So he's almost describing, was the spleen? he's
Cheney would know.
describing that that there's almost like an osmosis that happens, that if you're next to a higher, you know, frequency being, I guess, or a higher density or low density being, that can rub off on you, so that the dog that you let lick your face and sleep in your bed actually becomes closer to humanity over time, because it's like, you know, you're rubbing that desire body off on your dog.
Bro, those golden doodles look like people. What if those are like people in disguise? And the Full Metal Alchemist, when he fuses the little girl with the dog, and forms a chimera.
Dude, in this book, it's this is one of my favorite parts of the book, but he's seriously, without, it doesn't sound like a metaphor. He says that like those dogs will eventually attain the same type of consciousness as humans. They'll still be able to process abstract thought forms. They'll be able to take an abstract idea into the physical realm the same way that humans can.
And what is dog spelled backwards, Thomas?
I also skipped that class.
He is on to something, and I've got some stuff on that for my next live stream. So,
although I wanted to poke a hole in this one, because I don't think we've domesticated octopus, right? Octopi, and they're capable, I believe, of higher thought forms. Like, technically an octopus is about as smart as a dolphin or a dog, I think.
Yeah, and they're crazy, bro. And they change colors and everything. And I mean, they have ways of manipulating and opening jars and stuff like that.
Well, and octopi have not been in that same sort of connection with humans as, say, like a domesticated dog would. So I don't know, just poking. I'm just firing shots at you, Max.
Hey, it's and
I got 100 years of you know, hindsight on my side, though.
And this is because there is in each man an individual indwelling spirit which dictates the thoughts and actions of each individual human being, while there is one group spirit common to all different animals or plants of the same species. So again, further in this idea of,
I've got this in detail. I want to read the little tidbits that I picked.
I want to get to the snails, bro. Hurry up.
We're getting the snails come right after this.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna paraphrase some of this, but he kind of describes that all animals are the same in this group spirit concept. So all members of the same animal tribe are alike, and that's the point. A lion or its father or its son, they all look alike. There's no difference in the way they act under light conditions. I don't know if I agree with that, but this is how it's written. They all have the same likes and dislikes. One is the same as another. And I guess you can not, you know, you could ignore your family dog or your cats that have different dietary preferences, because they get a pass because they've been with humans for a while, right?
They're kind of sort of human, yeah, almost.
So then he describes not so with human beings. If we want to know about the characteristic of a certain type of person, I'm not going to write the word that he said there.
It's racist. It's all right.
It's not
very
enough
racist
that we examine one single individual. It will be necessary to examine each one individually, and then we'll arrive at no knowledge concerning the Irish as a whole, simply because which was a characteristic of one single Irish individual does not apply to the entire Irish race collectively.
So just because you get robbed by one doesn't mean that they're all criminals. That's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, if just because one, you know, O'Malley is a drunkard doesn't mean every single, you know, they're all mix. But then he says, if you want to know the character of Abraham Lincoln, it would avail us nothing to study his father, his grandfather, or his son, for they would differ entirely. Each would have its own peculiarities, quite distinct from the idiosyncrasies of Abraham Lincoln. So I don't know if I agree with all of this. I think that sometimes you can kind of tell where someone gets their behaviors and mannerisms and morals and stuff. But when he's talking here more on like a bigger collective thing, not just kind of nurture versus nature. He's talking at like an etheric aspect. And then this ends up with, we may write the biography of a man, but an animal can have no biography. I mean, you can go on Amazon right now and buy biographies of animals right now, whatever. This is because there is in each man an individual, an indwelling spirit which dictates the thoughts and actions of each being, while there is a group spirit common to all different animals or plants of the same species. The group spirit works on them from the outside. The tiger which roams the wild jungle and the tiger penned up in the cage are a menagerie of both expressions of that same group spirit. and then we get to the juices of the
Oof.
snail.
Let's do it, bro. I'm ready. My soul body, my snail body, everything, every
Let me whip my
ounce.
lips for this.
Yeah, go ahead, bro. Because you're the one that found this. I'll let you do it, but I did highlight all.
As the juices of the soft body of that snail crystallize into a hard shell, which it carries on its back, so the spirits in the higher worlds, in a similar manner, crystallize out of from themselves the dense material bodies of the different kingdoms. These juicy, snaily higher bodies, so fine and cloudy as to be invisible, are by no means emanations from the dense body, but the dense vehicles of all kingdoms correspond to the shell of a snail, which again is crystallized from its juices, the snail representing the spirit, and the juices of the body in their progress towards crystallization represent the mind, the desire body, and the vital body. So it's all about snail juices. That's his nut, and he brings up this analogy of snail juice and crystallization multiple times, 3 or 4 times throughout just the first 3 chapters. So the dude was big onto the snail analogy.
So when I saw this, because I hadn't gotten to this part when you had texted me, but when I saw this, I immediately thought that he was talking in some sort of code, right? When it came to, because he kept the snail, and the spirit.
You can convince me. You can convince me of that easily.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Can you pull up a bit? And I wanted to add that not all, but a majority of species of snail are hermaphrodite. Okay, if that has anything to do with it. But the juices of its body and their progress towards crystallization, representing the mind, desire body, and vital body. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
check out the juices on this one, bro.
Oof, nice.
Look at that juice.
Right on. Yeah, dude. Look at that snail. There you go.
Oof.
Oof. Yeah.
Juice.
Oh man, these people, bro. Oh.
And I wanted to, I don't know if I've got it ready here. My note with the inner, dude, look at all these freaking notes that I've got here. It's ridiculous. Here we go.
Oh, hold on. There you go.
This is what kept coming up to me when he keeps talking about a snail. This is the inner ear.
Oof, this guy gets it. This guy gets it, and this is something that Slick would point out. Hey, Thomas, if you flip it upside down and you invert it and you put it on, 3:2 aspect ratio, it's
you gotta flip it and
Baphomet.
reverse it, just like she said, man.
The cacao is a Baphomet's head flipped upside down. Yeah, this dude gets it. Evil Fandango understands exactly what we're getting at. So bingo. Our work here is done, brother. And let's wrap this episode up because this guy gets it. They understood the assignment. Okay. So
well, we only just got to the snail shell. It gets weirder from here on out. It doesn't get less weird.
Go ahead, bro.
Okay, so that we got into the snail juices. It's going to come up a few other times, but we're not going to talk directly about the snails. I want to talk about animals that can talk to spirits, and this is one of my favorite things that come up with where I don't really believe in spirits and woo-woo, but the concept that they've got those cats and those dogs in the retirement homes that'll go up and like sit in front of someone's bed and like, you're gonna die in 3 days. You know what I mean? Like, what do they know? Do they just hear that they're breathing weird, or is there like this etheric weird like ghost presence that they're detecting that we don't? Yeah, there we go.
As soon as you see that, right, you're in the nursing home. As soon as you see that one dog like stand in front of your door, you're just like,
well, that's where I started. But then it turns into like Mr. Ed, or like the little squirrels that can do arithmetic, or the birds that can ride the little bikes. Because he talks about, in a rare case when it happens, the etheric head of a horse can draw into the head of a dense body, and that horse can learn to read, count, and work examples in
Bro,
arithmetic.
that blew my mind when I read. I was like, "What the fuck is this guy?"
But that's
saying?
true. I mean,
What
there
the
are horses
fuck?
that can do this. I don't know if it's necessarily they're doing real arithmetic or if they just know to hit these certain things in a certain order. But he says that this peculiarity is also due to the fact that horses, dogs, cats, and other domestic animals sense the desire world, though not always realizing the difference between it and the physical world. And that's where I was like, is that how those dogs and cats are letting you know that Grammy's going to die? Is because they actually can see the desire body of Grammy coming and going, or maybe they see that silver cord get snipped, and it's like they recognize that pattern as something is going to change, and it's not because they have some extra sense, but it's more like that spirit world or that desire world is merging in with the physical world, and they can't tell the difference between the two. So I don't know. It's a interesting aspect of all of this.
You ever seen Spirited Away, bro?
Oh, of course, yeah.
It's
That's
one
one
of
of
my
the
favorite
only
movies.
anime movies that I really like.
One of my favorite movies. I've seen that movie so many times. He goes, "A horse will shy at the sight of a figure invisible to the driver. A cat will go through the motions of rubbing itself against invisible legs. The cat sees ghosts."
Matter of fact, this is very matter of fact.
However-
By the way,
However,
He's
without
not asking questions here.
However, without realizing that it has no dense legs available for frictional purposes. I can think of a few things that I use for frictional purposes as well. Go ahead, Thomas.
The dog, wiser than the cat or horse, will often sense there's something he does not understand about the appearance of a dead master whose hand it cannot lick. It'll howl mournfully and slink into a corner with a tail between its legs. So this, again, I think there's a lot of aspects in this book where the dude takes common sort of like, oddities in the world, and he tries to fit it all into this book and give explanations for everything. So it's like he just described Mr. Ed and the little birds that ride the bikes, like that's how they do arithmetic. He just described how animals can sense when someone's going to pass into the spirit world. He mentions maybe he had a cat, and he's like, how come this cat's always rubbing up on stuff and acting weird? I know. He's rubbing up on a desire body that we can't see in the physical realm. It's like, okay, cat's off the list. He's like going down this checklist of all these unexplained phenomenon, and it all just kind of fits into this worldview. So here's another one. This is the fingers in the curtain story. And I actually really liked this one. It's a little bit clunky, but I think he makes his point. So he says, imagine a room divided by a curtain. And I immediately think of like the secret Mormon room where they do the little handshake and you go up in the Mormon religion. But you're in a room divided by a curtain. On one side of the curtain represents the desire world, and the other is the physical world. There's two men in the room, one in each division. They can't see each other, nor can they get into the same division. There are, however, 10 holes in the curtain. So the man who is in the desire world puts his 10 fingers through these holes, representing the physical world. He now furnishes a representation of the group spirit, which is in the desire world. The fingers represent the animals belonging to one species. So my fingers here are like different lions that are out in the jungle. He can move them as he wills, but he cannot use them as freely nor as intelligently as the man who's walking about in the physical division using his body. The man in the physical world sees these fingers thrust through the curtain, and he observes that they all move, but he doesn't see the connection between them. To him, it appears as though they're all separate and distinct from one another. He can't see that the fingers of the man behind the veil are all governed by the movements of his intelligence. If he hurts one finger, if he hurts one finger, it's not just that finger that he hurt, but the man on the other side of the curtain. Just like if an animal is hurt, it suffers, but not to the degree that the group spirit does. The finger has no individualized consciousness. It moves as the man dictates. So as animals move as the group spirit dictates. Mm-hmm. So it's basically saying like, if you were to chop off this finger, you hurt me way more than you hurt the individual finger, and that kind of premise. And that's how he's describing this group spirit versus an individual spirit.
Mm-hmm. So all dogs go to heaven.
And yeah, and sticking fingers through a curtain, or the other thing that Mormons stick through holes in sheets too.
Right, the cosmic glory hole of reality. You got to remember,
right.
Don't stick your
it all
etheric
comes
dick in it.
back to cosmic glory.
Don't be sticking your etheric anything in anything that you don't know about. So, Let's see here. Where are you at? What that was? You
Dude,
want to talk about
we can
the?
start rapid firing here. So we've got music, and I pointed this one out for any musician. This is going to be like your favorite quote ever. So he says that music is the language of heaven, the spirit's true home, and it comes the divine spark imprisoned in flesh as a message read from its native land. Music appeals to all, regardless of race, creed, or otherworldly distinction. The higher and more spiritual the individual, the plainer does it speak to him. Even the savage beast is not unmoved by it. And this here we get into the cosmic gloves and condoms. Imagine a master musician putting on thin gloves to play his violin. We note that now his delicate touch is a little less subtle, and the soul of the music is gone. If he puts on a heavier pair of gloves over the first pair, now his hand is hampered to such an extent that he might occasionally create discord instead of harmony. Should he put another pair of gloves on, in addition to the two pairs that he already had on, a pair heavier than mittens, he would temporarily be unable to play, and one who had not heard him play previously, but before he put those mittens on, would naturally think that he had never been able to do so, especially if ignorant of the hampering of his hands. So it is with the spirit. Every step down, every descent into coarser matter is like putting on a pair of gloves would be to that musician. Every step down limits its power of expression until it's become so accustomed to its own limitations that it finds a focus, in the same way that the eye must find a focus after we enter a house on a bright summer day, and the pupil of the eye contracts to its own limit in the glare of the sun. And as the pupil expands and emits more light, the man is then unable to see well in the dimmer light in the house as he did in the sunlight. So this is my favorite analogy of like this violinist, or maybe like a surgeon or something, right? Like a surgeon with those thin gloves so he can feel and know exactly what he's doing. But if you put some like leather work gloves on that dude, you know what I mean? Like all of that precision is gone. All of that instant feedback that you get from the haptic, you know, just like feelings in your fingers, it all goes away. Mm-hmm. So this would be like, you know, putting 4 or 5 condoms on essentially. And we're joking about the condom analogy, but it comes up again later in my absolute favorite aspect of this. I'll leave it till the end, but that when you relive your life after you die, you relive it without your physical body, so that as you go back through, you re-experience all the pleasure and pain of your life, but that you're doing it without all those condoms on. You don't have gloves on. So when you go back and relive all of your experiences, you're reliving them at like 10 or 100 times the intensity, because you don't have, you know, you don't have the 7 condoms on. You feel it to the skin.
One man's meat is another man's poison. I just wanted to say that. And then, did you catch that? He says that here.
Oh, yeah, no. Okay, I thought that was another.
No, one man's
give
meat.
Respect it deserves.
No. He says that all oxen thrive on grass and all lions eat flesh, while one man's meat is another man's poison. Is that's another illustration of the.
That's also incorrect, by the way. There are definitely animals that have allergies that can't eat the same food as other animals.
It's another illustration of the all-inclusive influence of the group spirit as contrasted with the ego, which makes each human being require a different portion of food from every other. And then we have here, did you catch that last part? The animal, which is symbolized by the horizontal limb of the cross, is between the plant and the man. Its spine is in a horizontal position, and through it play the currents of the animal group spirit, which encircles the earth. No animal can be made to remain constantly upright, because in the case that the current of the group spirit could not guide it, and if it were not sufficiently individualized to endure the spiritual currents which enter the vertical human spine. So it's like talking about why their larynx can't be upright. It's because that was
interesting to me, because there are bipedal animals, but most bipedal animals do not walk upright constantly the same way that humans do. And if you believe in evolutionary science, whatever, it looks like humans were originally to be on all fours, and the fact that we stand upright is one of the things that hurts us so bad. It's what destroys your knees and your back and gives you neck problems. But of course, if you were on all fours too, you'd probably like destroy your hands and your knees too. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. But it's interesting in this analogy where it's another delineation between humanity and animals, that the human forms a cross, which kind of goes into the Christian mysticism a little bit more.
Yes. So Let's get to chapter 3 here.
Hold on. That section ends on, in time, the animal will become human and have liberty of choice and will
Where you
make
at?
mistakes and learn by them. That's right after they talk about the oxen thrives on grass and the lions eat flesh.
Yeah.
It ends with, in time, the animal will become human. So
Mhm.
I don't know if this is a metaphorical, like the spirit evolves and they eventually get
I think
to
so.
process the same thought forms, or if literally an animal eventually becomes a human.
What if Bigfoot is like in between animal and the human spirit, right? Like the human realm or whatever it is in evolution. He's just like in between. He's like both at the same time. And that's why we see him the way that we see him. Again, I mean, that makes sense to me. And for those that want to believe in evolution and those that don't, I mean, that right, there's that little graph where it's like little and then it gets bigger, right? The monkeys and all that stuff. So, I mean, it makes
All
sense
right,
to me.
let's do chapter 3.
Go
This
ahead.
is the long one.
Yep. Have at
Go,
it,
bitch.
Thomas. Have at it.
So I'm gonna go right into what he calls, thought form programming. He says, where no immediate action is called for by mental images of impacts from without, these can be projected directly on the reflecting ether. I think that's the part where an idea that's out in the etheric realm, it goes through this reflecting ether, and that's the medium in which you even take notice of this idea that then brings it into your head. So the spirit working through the mind has instant access to the storehouse of conscious memory. I think this is the Akashic records. So your spirit has like the library card that can get you into the Akashic records, and that it may at any time resurrect any picture found there and do them with enough spiritual force and project them upon the desire body to compel action. So it's almost like you're just like constantly seeking out something that might be out there, and if you hone on to something that your spirit thinks is worthy, then it passes it off to your desire body, and the desire body decides whether or not you want to give that thing focus or not. And if you do want to give it focus, then it becomes thought form, and then you can decide to use your desire to create that thought form and bring it into reality. And he says each time such a picture is thus used, it gains vividness, strength, and efficiency, and will compel action along its particular line more readily than previous actions, because it cuts grooves and produces a phenomenon of thought gaining or growing upon us by repetition. And you know what else um, grows in vividness, strength, and efficiency by repetition? This sounds
This
like
dick.
magical. Well, okay, thank you. But he's describing kind of like magical ritual at this point, no? Like when you repeat the same process in the same place with the same intent, it theoretically gets stronger each time that happens. Even if you've never done it before, if you go to a place that's charged and you repeat the same sort of ritual, you're in theory kind of like leveraging all the previous rituals that happen in that spot, and so on and so on, if you believe in the woo-woo part. But this is the Christian mysticism Rosicrucian version of that. But it's saying that like these Akashic records out there, it's like if I check out the boat book, from the Akashic records, there's a better chance that someone else is going to check it out afterwards. And that might kind of explain how like these new ideas and this new technology comes into being, and then all of a sudden it just starts rapidly growing, and a bunch of people start having that idea over and over. I don't remember exactly who said it, but I've seen some really cool interviews where people mention that like the first guy that invented the wheel or the semiconductor or whatever, fill in the blank, if he hadn't done it, another person would have done it like that same year or within the same amount of time, because it was like that idea was ready to be manifested into the world. It wasn't waiting on a person to find it. It was just like the first person that connected with it. It was time for that idea. So I don't know. I think this fits in nicely, almost like a glove.
Yeah, and it would make sense that, again, it's controversial, but the idea that all these gods that we've known are propped up by this ideology of it being sent back over, and that's how they're being kept alive. And I read this book where it's talking about how initiation and subtle energy works like this, because they're feeding off of the devotees of that religion. And I've always said that every religion kind of sort of has like their own energy pools that they're able to tap into, and that's what's keeping their egregores or their people alive, right? So I mean, it's gonna make some people feel some type of way, but where you
You
are
can
right
feel
now,
any way you want, man.
you can feel
Well, so
any way you
that
want.
he brings up the 21 grams experiment. If you're interested in the 21 grams experiment, just look it up on your own, I think. But he gives a lot of credit to it, and he cites it as proof that this different etheric body exists. Although he doesn't attribute the 21 grams exactly to the spirit, because he kind of gives this credence to like the spirit realm has the physical body and the physical vehicle, and all that belongs by itself, and the spirit doesn't necessarily interact the same way, but that the difference does matter. Although there's an example that like a few years after that big claim came out and this guy latched onto it, a professor Lavi Twining, he basically repeated the 21 grams experiment, but he put animals inside of flasks and killed them. He was a great guy. And then saw that while the animal lost the weight, it was mostly condensation through sweat and through like, discharge. But if you captured all that in a flask, then the weight didn't change. So it was actually like a disproof. But this book cites that guy too as further proof. But it doesn't seem like in reality that he was backing that. It seems like he was disproving that.
And then he goes, there was no difference, though one of the animals was a Saint Bernard dog. So I guess Saint Bernard dogs don't change in weight when they die. I don't know why, but
so here's the part about cremation being good. He mentions the silver cord is a very complicated aspect of all this, but just know that there's this silver cord that connects your physical body to your ethereal body. So he mentions that the silver cord breaks at a point and the same division is made during sleep. But the important difference is that though the vital body returns to the dense body, it no longer penetrates it, but simply hovers over it. And I think this is explaining that concept of like out of body experiences where people will say that they woke up or they were in a hospital room and they're looking down at their body or they're outside their body. I think it leans towards that. And he says that hence it simply hovers over it. The remains floating over the grave, for example, decaying synchronously with a dense vehicle. So now you're talking about like a ghost that's latched on to the body that's buried under a grave. And he says that hence to the trained clairvoyant, a graveyard is a nauseating sight. And if only more people could see it, a little argument would be necessary to induce them to change their present unsanitary method of disposing the dead to a more rational method of cremation, which restores the elements to their primordial condition without objectionable features incident to the process of slow decay. This is again like, don't let your body rot away for weeks or months or years, because that means that your sort of ethereal body is going to be stuck and attached to it. And then if you do the cremation, then it purifies it quicker.
So what are your, would that be a reason why there are hauntings, like residual, like they talk about residual hauntings in certain places and stuff like that? Because it would be like if there's a battlefield of people that died in that area, they're kind of stored as still lingering around because of this silver cord type of thing, right?
Part of that. Also, he mentions that not all people know that they're dead. So this is a seed analogy. So
yeah, real quick though, this guy was a former Pentecostal minister, and a lot of people
were you Pentecostal?
A lot of people don't know, but I was actually born and raised Pentecostal Christian, so I just want to put that out.
So I want to jump to two different stories. He's got a story of a gold hoarder and a story of a drunkard, and they have sort of the same.
The drunkard is my favorite
concept. So okay, let me start with the hoarder, and you do the drunkard. Okay.
All right.
So there was a miser who loved his gold and earth, loves it just as dearly after death. But in the first place, he cannot acquire anymore because he no longer has a dense body to grasp it. And worst of all, he can't even keep what he hoarded during his life. He will perhaps go and sit by his safe and watch his cherished gold or bonds. But the heirs appear, and with a stinging jeer at the stingy old fool who they do not see, but he sees and hears them, will open his safe, and as though he may throw himself over his gold to protect it, they'll put their hands through him, neither knowing nor caring that he's there, and will then proceed to spend his hoard while he suffers in sorrow and impotent rage. So this is like, if you're attached to material possessions, even after you die, that attachment can keep you right there, like just fast, being infatuated over your material possessions still. And then people come in and they take it away. Like, imagine when the family comes into grandma's house after she passes away, and like, all of the brothers and sisters are arguing over who gets the flat screen TV or who's going to get the couch. But like, Grammy's there like, no, don't take my TV. I need that. I mean, obviously they're talking about a gold hoarder, which is like a very specific type. So yeah, do the drunkard.
Or take the case of the drunkard. He is just as fond of intoxicants after death as he was before, is my favorite part here. It is not the dense body that craves drink. It is made sick by alcohol and would rather be without it. It vainly protests in different ways, but the desire body of the drunkard craves the drink and forces the dense body to take it. That the desire body may have the sensation of pleasure resulting from the increased vibration. That desire remains after the death of the dense body, but the drunkard has in his desire body neither mouth to drink, not stomach to contain physical liquor. He may and does get into saloons where he interpolates his body into the bodies of drinkers to get a little of their vibrations by induction, but that is too weak to give him much satisfaction.
I kind of love this.
Well, and I have something on this. He may and also does sometimes get inside a whiskey cask, but that is of no avail either, for there are in the cask no such fumes as are generated in the digestive organs of a tippler. It has no effect upon him, and he is like a man in an open boat on the ocean. Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Consequently, he suffers intensely. In time, however, he learns that the uselessness of longing for drink which he cannot obtain. As with so many of our desires in the earth life, all desires in the desire world die for want of opportunity to gratify them. When the drunkard has been purged, he is ready, so far as this habit is concerned, to leave this state of purgatory and ascend into the heaven world. And if you think about this, right, he's talking about how this spirit will enter other bodies of drunk people. Well, if you think about bar, right, it means Sumerian. In Sumerian, it means altar. And you drink wine and spirits at bars. And I've heard people talk about how people get possessed when they drink. And he's talking about this right here. He's talking about the possession of people when they're drinking. Right? That's wild.
He goes into that a little bit more too. And he explains that like some people will get into these fits of anger or rage. And that anger or rage actually could be, again, the homunculus that we talked about in the Cartesian voyage, that if you leave your body too long, if you take the DMT and you trip out in outer space, if you're gone too long, then a homunculus, an astral homunculus, can come and take over your body.
You said it,
and it knows how to make you act. So other people might see you acting really strange, but it's not your consciousness that's acting strange. It's like a homunculus.
Confirmed. Certified homunculus. Good God, that's a homunculus.
I didn't say it. You fucking said it, Thomas. Okay.
Technically, that was AI that was just talking.
Well, yeah. Anyways, you brought up the homunculus concept because this also relates to kind of sort of what we were talking about in the voyage of to the world of Cartesius. So, again, so
this is that spirit. So if you're in a bar and you start acting like you're not yourself, that could have been a desire body that jumped into your body just because it wanted to feel what getting drunk was like. And honestly, this could be a whole topic that we could go on a crazy tangent because, yeah, alcohol makes you want Coke. I don't know if that's Coca-Cola or we're talking about.
Of course, right?
but there could be an interesting conversation here that people that are under like a strong addiction to a certain drug or chasing the dragon, or they got that monkey on their back, that might be in the context of this cosmology Rosicrucian book, but addictions might actually be another desire body that's like latched itself onto you, that's like, go get more drugs because it's the thing that wants the drugs and not you.
Real quick, everybody in the chat, make sure to sign up for the Kickstarter. But what you're talking about, Thomas, is in that movie Homunculus on Netflix. Everyone's traumas and deepest, darkest secrets manifest itself as a homunculus on the person, bro. So, again, it's an interesting concept that there are these little gremlins of reality, or these entities, right, that are able to not only, they can interact with us and when our body, he does say during sleep we step outside of our body, right? And they're able to step in our body. I know he said that somewhere in here, but
It's when that cord is disconnected, then your body's almost open rein, like something else could come in and attach it, because again, it's no longer in your body, it's hovering above it, so something can slip in while it's hovering.
interesting. Okay.
So we're gonna get into my absolute favorite out of all three of these chapters. This is the part that I'm gonna be bringing this up constantly, so get ready for it.
Oh yeah.
So this is Desire World time, and he says that in the Desire World, life is lived at 3 times the speed as in the physical world. Very matter of fact, very specific. A man who has lived to be 50 years of age in the physical world would live back through the same life events in the Desire World in about 16 years. This is, of course, only a general gauge. There are persons who remain in the Desire World much longer than their term of physical life, and others again who have led lives with few desires pass through in a much shorter period. But the measure above given is very nearly correct for the average man of present day. I want to know where the numbers came from, where's the spreadsheets, but whatever.
Source, trust
He
me,
says, during his life in the Desire World, all of these life pictures roll backwards as before, but now the man has all the feeling that is possible for him to have, one by one, as the scenes pass before him. Every incident in his past life is lived over again. When he comes to a point where he has injured somebody, he himself feels that pain as if the injured person felt it. He lives through all the sorrow and suffering he has caused to others, and he learns just how painful the hurt is and how hard to bear the sorrow he has caused. In addition, there's a fact already mentioned that this suffering is much keener because he has no dense body to dull the pain. Perhaps that's why the speed of life is tripled, that the suffering may lose in duration what it gains in sharpness. Nature's measures are wonderfully just as true. So this one blew my mind because first he's talking about Benjamin Button style, like reliving like after you die, you relive everything in reverse order. And this is almost like when you go to the gates, right? And you put your life up on judgment and God tells you, here's all the things that you did, good and bad. This is a way more natural automatic process. No one's going to sit here and say like, you did these naughty things. You're going to have to relive all of those for yourself. And that if you hurt someone emotionally or physically, you feel their pain. And in addition to you feeling that pain, you don't get to feel it with all those gloves on, all those cosmic condoms on. Now you have to go back and feel it without any protection. And the reason why I thought this was so cool is because we think of like pleasure and pain as a side effect of having a physical body, but he's kind of reinterpreting it as that, no, if anything, your physical body is dulling pain and pleasure, and that if you can feel it without your physical body attached, that you feel it. He doesn't say exactly how much, but it sounds like it. His quote is that what it loses in duration, it gains in sharpness. So the fact that you're reliving your life at 3 times the speed, maybe you're like re-feeling pleasure and pain at 3 times the amount. Who knows?
And there's a way to lessen this, right? He talks about it.
Yeah, dude. So this was the coolest part I found in the Occult Anatomy of Man that we covered on occultbookclub.com previous issue. But they mentioned that there's a Rosicrucian technique, and in that book, they don't talk about why you do this, but that at the end of each day, you relive everything that you did in reverse order. So when Manly, I think it was Manly Palmer Hall that mentioned that as a Rosicrucian technique, but he was
inspired by Heindel, so it makes sense.
He was inspired by Heindel, but the way he described that was almost like it was like a life hack, to like get to put yourself on the straight and narrow and to just be more conscious about things. But the way that this Rosicrucian book is describing it is that by reliving every day from the last thing that happened to the first thing, you're actually practicing. You're like in training, you're doing all of the calisthenics to prepare yourself for when you die and have to go through this purgatory. Now you're trained yourself to live in reverse. And not just that, but if you go through the events of the day, you're supposed to think, oh, this thing that I said to this person, or I interacted with, a family member, did that make them feel good or bad? And if you're conscious about that, you might start actively trying to like treat people better or just not cause any suffering or pain. And just by being conscious of that and practicing on how to live backwards, by the time you get to this sense of purgatory, you have to relive this desire world. You can kind of skip through it because you've been studying your whole life.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, then now we have and I've also heard it called the Pythagorean recollection method too. I've also heard it every day at the end of
reliving your day in reverse.
Yes, and analyzing it and doing it. I've done it. So, I mean, if it works to help you avoid purgatory in some sort of way, and you're able to pass the first heaven directly after death, if you're able to master this, I guess. And are you gonna talk about the borderland? You have another one there?
I didn't pick up on the borderland.
Yeah, and I don't have anything on it either. We have the first heaven, and what else do you have on here?
I got children before 14 years. There's a class who lead a particularly beautiful life, the children. If we could but see them, we would quickly cease our grief. I've met some pretty shitty 14-year-olds in modern times. Maybe in 1909, like every 14-year-old was just, peaceful as pie. But he says that
my 5-year-old's a fucking asshole, so yeah, it's completely off.
When a child dies before the birth of the desire body, which again is at age 14, it does not go any higher than the first heaven because it's not responsible for its actions any more than an unborn child is responsible for the pain it causes the mother by turning and twisting in the womb. Therefore, a child has no purgatorial existence. That which is not quickened cannot die. Hence, the desire body of the child, together with the mind, will persist until a new birth. And for that reason, children are very apt to remember their previous life as instance elsewhere. So they're mentioning that, like, if you die before you turn 14, then you actually get to take a little bit of, I guess, your knowledge and your experience onto the next body, because it doesn't have to go through the entire cycle and go back through all of purgatory again. You just get to jump into the next body that's available, I guess.
Interesting. And then I have here, he goes on to say, where he's talking about Pythagoras. Did you catch that part?
Oh, yeah.
We have Pythagoras was not romancing when he spoke of the music of the spheres, for each one of the heavenly orbs has its definite tone, and together they sound the celestial symphony, which goeth also mention the prologue to his Faust, where the scene is laid in heaven. And then he goes on to say what he said, but he talks about the experience of the poet are akin to those of the musician, for poetry is the soul's expressions of the innermost feelings in the world, which are ordered according to the same laws of harmony and rhythm that govern the outpouring of the spirit in music. And there was a part that I wanted to talk about because it talks about something that I've touched on. And here we go. We got more snail stuff. Do you have anything before that? Because we have more snail stuff.
No, I'm on the snail.
All right. So the occult, all right. As stated above, the forces of the seed atom are withdrawn to the materialist force, and matter are inseparable. The occultist knows, right? They all know differently. To him, they are not two entirely distinct and separate concepts, but two poles of one spirit. Matter is crystallized spirit. Force is the same spirit not yet crystallized. Now we get back into the snail. This has been said before, but it cannot be too strongly impressed upon the mind. In this connection, the illustration of the snail is very helpful. Matter, which is crystallized spirit, corresponds to the snail's house, which is crystallized snail. The chemical force which moves matter, making it available for the building of form, and the snail which moves its house are also good correspondences. That which is now the snail will in time become the house, and that which is now force will in time become matter when it has crystallized further. The reverse process of resolving matter into spirit is also going on continually. The coarser phase of this process we see as decay, when a man is leaving his vehicles behind, and at the time the spirit of an atom is easily detachable from the coarser spirit. So this to me screams what the Taoists were doing with the golden little man, where they were able to crystallize this spirit, this force, this what they call the
homunculus.
Yeah.
Homunculus confirmed. Certified homunculus.
And he's talking about the snail. So we're going to have to talk about snails from now on, right? The occult snail, the cosmic snail.
I'm not as sold on the snail analogy as this dude was. I just want to say that out loud.
I think it's cool, bro. And
I
then
think it's cool, but I don't think it's as strong of an analogy as he mentioned, because the slime of a snail is chemical, it is physical, and it's just calcifying, right? Just turning into a harder substance. So it's like the snail. We're not talking about the snail has a spirit that then turns into physical form, but I understand that the analogy can only be so good.
Evil Fandango gets it, bro. He understands this shit. So the second heaven, and this part stood out to me because I recently had on Stacy Brown Jr. and they did an experiment, a version of the Gateway experiment at the Conjuring House. Okay, where they put on these headphones and they were able, because he talked about Pythagoras and the music of the spheres. Well, Stacy Brown Jr. talked to me about how when they were doing this seance or this experiment at the Conjuring House, which again could be a portal to another dimension if you believe in spirits and demons and ghosts and stuff, but he was able to enter this, what he called, I forgot what he called it, but the absolute. And he said that it felt great and that it was this place where it felt like nothing could ever happen to you, and it was just this empty, desolate area, but you felt safe. And he talks about here in occult science, this is called the great silence, or the great forever of standing utterly alone, yet unafraid. And his soul is filled with a wonderful peace, which passeth all understanding. And that's what he was talking about when he explained that to me. He felt that he had traveled through time or space or whatever it is to this great beyond. And it makes me think of Full Metal Alchemist when he speaks to truth, and it's like in this other realm in front of the gates. And obviously that's very Kabbalistic because it has to do with the tree of life. But I've been studying Kenneth Grant, and one of the aspects of one of the Sephiroths, I believe it is, one of these other dimensions, is that there is a dimension where time travels backwards. Now, I'm not gonna drop what I'm saving for another episode with Mario from Symbolic Studies, but it has to do with this concept of going back in time and the crossing of the abyss, and why occultists were obsessed with that. I'm gonna leave it at that, but yeah, this part stood out to me because I had just done that episode of the here the first awakening brings to the spirit the sound of the music of the spheres. And again, you know, it's this other place where he felt safe. It was empty and desolate, but he was unafraid of it. Know anything on that?
Well, after the silence, he starts talking about vibrations. I kind of like, he's got like a little segue here. I don't know if it was intentional, but he talks about the great silence and how this part rubbed me a little bit wrong, because before he was talking about being very clear, very matter of fact, and like layman terms. But then he says, in our earth life, we are so immersed in little noises and sounds in our limited environment that we're incapable of hearing the music of the marching orbs, but the occult scientist hears it. This is kind of like, explain this more, my dude, but he doesn't. And he says, he knows, the occultist, that the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 7 planets are a sounding board, and the strings of Apollo's 7-stringed lyre. He knows that were a single discord to mar the celestial harmony from the grand instrument, there'd be a wreck of matter and a crash of worlds. And when I read that, I was like, what happened to that promise when you were like, all this is going to make sense, we're going to break it all down? And now we're absolutely talking in metaphors and, like, you know, symbolic language here. We've departed the world of layman's terms. But then he goes on to some woo-woo stuff that I think that everyone likes. The power of rhythmic vibration is well known to all who have given the subject even the least study. For example, soldiers are commanded to break step when crossing a bridge, otherwise their rhythmic tramp would shatter the strongest structure. And this is actually true. This is a very real aspect in the military, that when you come up to a bridge, everyone kind of like breaks up their marching pattern, because there have been real examples in history when, you know, soldiers brought a bridge down and people got hurt because of this. And he says that the Bible story of sounding the ram's horn while marching around the walls of Jericho is not nonsensical in the eyes of the occultist. In some cases, similar things have happened without the world smiling. And he kind of mentioned this thing that previously this has happened and people didn't laugh about it, but now if you bring up the fact that vibrations, I guess in 1909, have all this extra power, people would kind of sneer a little bit. And so here's where he's got just a random trust me bro anecdote, but I gotta mention it. He said this is called the Castle Wall story. A few years ago, what year? 1900, whatever. A few years ago, a band of musicians were practicing in a garden close to the wall of an old castle. There occurred a single place in the music, a prolonged and very piercing note. When this note was sounded, the wall of the castle fell. The musicians had struck the keynote of the wall, and it was sufficiently prolonged to shatter it. Again, no names, no dates, no places, just the trust me bro story. But I mean, it fits with the story of the bridge. It fits with the fall of Jericho. And it's just like a little anecdotal version of that same thing. I thought of like Coral Castle, where the dude was like levitating stuff through the power of vibration. So vibration was a huge buzzword around the early 20th century for sure.
What about the sneeze? Hold on.
I'll take this opportunity to go into my next favorite part, where
Go ahead.
He relates vibrations to being both color and music. And he says that there's a world of tone which cannot be thought as if there's no colors. So everyone knows that there's an intimate connection between color and tone, because when a certain tone is struck, a certain color can appear simultaneously. He's talking about synesthesia here, where some people can hear a note and see a color, and there's different types of synesthesia. And I went on a whole rabbit hole of synesthesia here.
Yeah, it's really
and I even came up there's one called number form, which I didn't even know about. This one blew my mind. But number form is a version of synesthesia, but it's when someone is describing mathematical patterns or just like some kind of a timeline. Some people will literally see real numbers kind of like spread out in front of them. It's like the meme with Zach Galifianakis, where it's like doing math in space and there's all these like formulas. There's some people that actually have this very real phenomenon where they see numbers right in front of them without having to think about it. It just happens, and they can just kind of communicate. I wonder if this was what like Tesla had or something.
You obviously don't listen to the 101 podcast, or else you would have heard about that shit like a year ago when I talked about it. So
well, this came from a book called Visions of Sane Persons by Sir Francis Galton. And I don't know if you covered that particular book, Visions of Sane Persons.
I did, yes.
You liar.
Yes, I did, bro. I did a whole presentation on Emily Moyer's show about it, bro. Okay. So eat a bag of dog
I thought that was fascinating. I didn't realize that was part of synesthesia, but I guess it is.
Yeah, because it makes you think of why in the Matrix, it's green, right? I mean, it's the idea of, again, it had to do with the Pythagorean palaces and how Marsilio Ficino talked about how numbers quite literally like have sex with each other and multiply reality into existence. But you wouldn't know anything about that, bro. I mean, it's all good, dude.
So here's another part that gets into the Archons. And this I think was controversial when I read it, and I don't know if I read it the same way that you did. So this is a part where I think is interesting conversation can happen.
October 17th, 2022, okay, magicians, number forms, and architectura imaginadas. So I just wanted to point that out, bro.
And while you're at that, go to paranoidamerican.com, click on Chosen One number 2.
Patreon.com/the101 podcast, and you can check that episode out there. So
he mentions the second heaven is the real home of man, the ego and the thinker. Here he dwells for centuries, assimilating the fruit of his last earth life and preparing the earthly conditions which will best suit for his next step in progress. This is the part where I didn't know what to think about this. It says, all the denizens of heaven work upon the models of the earth, all of which are regions of concrete thought. They alter the physical features of the earth. They bring about gradual changes that vary its appearance, so that on each return to physical life, a different environment has been prepared. Climate, flora, and fauna are all altered by man under the direction of higher beings. Thus, the world is what we make ourselves individually and collectively, and it's what we will make of it. The occult scientist sees in everything that happens a cause of spiritual nature manifesting itself. So that line, climate, flora, and fauna are altered by man under the direction of higher beings.
To be
Does this
described
mean that ghosts are doing climate change to us?
No, but in the book of Enoch, it talks about how every single angel is in charge of a certain aspect of reality. So that's what as soon as I read that, that's what I interpreted when I saw that.
But it sounds like when you go into the physical world, at some point you return back to the heavens.
Yes.
So that means that me and you at one point are going to be playing Minecraft with the actual Earth, and we're going to be terraforming, and I'm going to be like, I'm going to put a mountain over here, so when I go back down onto Earth, I can like snowboard on that mountain or whatever.
Mhm.
You know, it feels like that's what he's describing, and it's not that there's these archons that are far detached, and it's like a different sort of class of being that we'll never get to be. Like me and you will literally become those archons that start terraforming the Earth, and we're doing it so that we can relive that Earth. But when it says that it's altered by man under the direction, it's almost, you know, I'm imagining like these big ghost arms coming down and like, you know, telling someone to start a war, just so that that war will be a catalyst to change the landscape. So when I come back down again, or, you know, start burning plastic or start drilling for
That's
oil or
divine.
whatever.
That would be divine intervention. And I mean, a lot of religions were started with a divine intervention, right? A prophecy or a vision from a higher entity. So religion,
But
as we
this
know
gives
it,
credit to the whole like the fundamentalists that are trying to bring revelations, right? And they're like,
Mhm.
let's drill for oil and let's cause these like cataclysms. But you could almost blame it. It's like, well, I'm not doing that. Those are like the ghost
It's these
arms that are like,
fucking demons.
yeah, these archons are making me do this.
These
Man. It's not my
demons, man, they're
problem.
just making me do everything. You know, I just can't admit I'm a piece of shit.
But it's not a
so-
demon. It's grandma. Like that's like, you know what I mean? Like grandma went back. Well, they say a few centuries, so it would have to be like great 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 grandma or something. But you know, it's normal regular entities that lived on Earth at one point that are now in charge of terraforming the Earth, just so they
Mhm.
can return back to that Earth.
Mm-hmm. And I have here, the mathematician has to deal with space, and the faculty for space perception is connected with the delicate adjustment of the three semicircular canals, which are situated inside the ear, each pointing in one of the three dimensions in space. Now, we're back to the snail, because if you pull up a picture of the ear canal, how we did earlier, not only does it look like Baphomet, but it also looks like a snail. So,
And I didn't. I mean, I guess this is obvious to anyone that paid attention in school, but I didn't. But he's describing how these semicircular canals are the basis for our interpretation of three-dimensional reality, because
yes.
you've got one that goes vertical right here, you know, you've got another one that goes completely horizontal. So here's your Y plane and your X plane. And then you've got this other one that goes between them, which is kind of your Z plane. So here's your Cartesian coordinates represented by these three different semicircular canals. And that he also mentions that your sense of hearing is the most heightened and it's the most direct sense, which correlates to where he thinks that music is like the highest art form, because music is temporal and you can't capture it or imprison it the same way as that you can make a painting or a sculpture, where now it exists in reality
It's
in a
more
physical
elusive.
form. It's he uses that exact word, right? It's more elusive.
Mhm. And the music so reproduced loses much of the soul stirring sweetness it possesses when it comes fresh from its own world, carrying the soul memories of its home and speaking to it in a language that no beauty expressed in marble or upon canvas can equal. And he's talking about here about making statues and capturing these different essences in either music, or right, how music is the most elusive because it comes directly from that world, and how you're kind of able to do that with statues and bringing it down, but not really, because music is the most beautiful, right? It's like it's the one that you always have to read.
I think it's worth reading in length here. So he says that among ordinary musical people, the greatest degree of efficiency is about 15 sounds per fiber. But a master musician who's able to interpret and bring down music from heaven requires a greater range to be able to distinguish the different notes and detect the slightest discord in even the most complicated chords. And this correlates to like the old ancient perfumers. I don't know if you've seen that movie Perfume, where the guy has like this heightened sense of smell, and he can smell things that are like far away. And but essentially that's a very real aspect, where people that can smell very well have like a mutation with their olfactory senses that actually increases the sensitivity. Well, there, that same kind of aspect he's kind of describing here with your ear and being able to hear to that same level of like a perfumer. And he says that no other ranks so high as a musician, which is responsible for what we consider what the painter draws chiefly from the world of color, but the musician brings us to the atmosphere of our heavenly home world, where spirits are citizens, and to translate them into the sounds of earth life. Oof. The musician is on the highest mission, because a mode of expression for soul, life, and music reigns supreme. Music is different and higher than all other arts that can be understood when we reflect that a statue or painting, once created, is permanent. They draw from the desire world and are therefore more easily crystallized, while music is from the heaven world. It's more elusive and must be recreated each time we hear it. It cannot be imprisoned, as shown by unsuccessful attempts to do so by devices such as phonographs. And that part was like, well, now we actually have, like very high bit rate, 48 kilohertz sampling and 24-bit music. So I guess you could still make that same argument, though, that you can't capture audio and all the energy that goes into like a live musical performance the same way as that a painter or a sculptor would bring their thought form into reality. Because music, it's not you bringing a thought form into the physical world, except for that exact moment when that violinist is stroking that string and making it emit that one frequency. But like nothing at any point has manifested itself into the physical world outside of the vibration.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything in between that? Because I have this thing here. Thus we see that man learns to build his vehicles in the heaven world, and use them in the physical world.
Oh, I thought this was like Build-A-Bear, but it's like Build-A-Body. Like after you die, you go to like a big Build-A-Body store.
We have the third heaven, and I don't have anything until he talks about the purpose of life, which is not happiness, but experience. And then,
well, I got one thing on the third heaven, where he says that the ineffable harmony of the higher world is strengthened for its next dip into matter. And there comes a time for desire for a new experience and contemplation of a new birth. And this conjures up a series of pictures before the vision of the spirit, a panorama of the life in store for it. So this is you about to re-enter the world. And it's like, here's the movie preview. Here's like the movie trailer of the life dead that you're about to go into.
Yeah, where you're watching your parents fuck, and then you choose them by how your parents are having sex.
And it says that this panorama contains only principal events. The spirit has a free will as to the details. So if it's like a man going to a distant city with a time limit ticket, an initial choice of a route. After he's chosen to begin his journey, and he's not sure that he can change to another route during the trip, he might stop over in as many places as he wishes within a time limit, but he cannot go back. Thus, as he proceeds on his journey, he becomes more and more limited by each past choice. If he's chosen a railroad using soft coal, he can expect to be soiled and dusty. Had he chosen a road burning anthracite or using electricity, he would have been cleaner. So it is with the man in a new life. He can choose to live a hard life, but he's free to choose whether he will live it cleanly or wallow in the mire. Sure. So this is kind of dope, man. This is like, you're going to see exactly what you're going to go through, but then you get to decide how you get from all the different point A to point B.
I don't remember any of that, Thomas. Okay? I don't remember seeing any of this ever. Wasn't it?
That's because I just made it up on the fly. I got that all from ChatGPT, actually.
Didn't Nick Cage just come out saying that he remembers his life in the womb or something? You saw that?
I mean, if you did that, this book makes a strong argument, because if he remembers his life in the womb, that might mean that he almost got born before, but then died, and then was able to carry some of those memories into that next body that he jumped into. So if he does remember his life in the womb, it might not have been Nicolas Cage in the womb. It might have been like the previous body that
I
he
got
died
you.
in, and then brought that memory back.
The purpose of life is not happiness, but experiences. And then this part right here, sorrow and pain are the most benevolent teachers, while the joys of life are but fleeting. And this seems a stern doctrine, and the heart cries out passionately at even the thought that it may be possible to be true. Nevertheless, it is true, and upon examination it will be found not such a stern doctrine after all. Consider, and then he's talking about the reason we have pain is a good thing, because if you were to put your hand in a fire on top of a stove and feel no pain, you would lose that limb eventually because all the nerves and everything would burn away. But because we have pain, it's a good thing because it alerts you to take your hand away from the fire. So it's kind of like inverting this thing, like pain is actually, what is it? Pain is weakness leaving the body. I was like, no, pain is good for you, right? What doesn't kill you makes you strong.
Well, and there's another, this one is a little oversimplified, but like leprosy is the disease where, you know, your limbs fall off or your body starts decaying. Well, one aspect of leprosy is actually that the nerves are no longer letting you know that, you know, your body's uncomfortable. So what can happen, it's almost like old people in beds that get those bed sores. If you don't roll over every once in a while, you're cutting off circulation, you're preventing your skin from breathing, and like those little moments of discomfort, which we all take for granted, that's what makes you shift in your chair a little bit, right? Or like move your foot over. Well, if you don't have that sensation that says, hey, you know, move your leg a little bit, dummy, then it just, you know, starts to decay a little bit. So leprosy is actually more about no longer feeling pain, and the result of not feeling that pain is that now you don't know when to like move your body around, so then it starts to decay a little bit. It's not that you get leprosy and your body just starts, you know, decaying. It's more about that. It's like the lack of pain, and that kind of shows you why pain is important.
We have here, so instead of losing the hand, we escape with a blister, which quickly heals. And the next thing I have here, man is also in school, the school of experience. He must return many times before he can hope to master all the knowledge in the world of sense. No one earth life, however rich in experience, could furnish the knowledge, so nature decrees that he must return to earth after intervals of rest to take up his work where he dropped it, exactly as a child takes up its work in school each day. So he's talking about the reincarnation, how it's necessary because you're continuing your work over and over and over again.
I wonder how deep that school analogy goes. Like, are we in different grades or degrees? You know what I mean? Am I at like a fifth degree and someone else is at a third degree, or how does that work?
Again, if there were no return to earth, what is the use of living? Why strive for anything? Why should a life of happiness and an eternal heaven be the reward for a good life? What benefit could come from a good life in heaven where everybody's already happy? Surely in a place where everybody is happy and contented, there is no need for sympathy, self-sacrifice, or wise counsel. No one would need them here, but on earth there are many who need those very things, such as humanitarian and altruistic qualities are the greatest service to struggling humanity. Therefore, the great law for which works for good brings man back to work again in the world for benefit to himself and others with his acquired treasures instead of letting them go to waste in a heaven where no one needs them. So he's talking about, again, why we need reincarnation in some sort of way. And I grew up Pentecostal Christian. A lot of people don't know that, but I wasn't ever taught about reincarnation. I was taught about something else.
If you brought up reincarnation in the Pentecostal church, would that be like blasphemy?
Blasphemy, yeah.
No.
Yeah. This dude was on it when he was talking about it. He said even questioning is blasphemy. So even talking about this book is blasphemy, according to when I was raised Pentecostal Christian. A lot of people don't know that, but the preparations for birth. Do you have anything on that?
No, I've got some that come after this.
All right, go ahead.
So after this one, there's the blood of the vehicle of the ego. And this is what I was talking about before, about at like the age 14, there's something very specific, and they try to tie it to science here. It says, in infancy and up to the 14th year, the red marrow bones do not make all the blood corpuscles. Most of them are supplied by the thymus gland, which is the largest in the fetus, and gradually diminishes as the individual blood-making faculty develops in the growing child. This is true, that the thymus gland contains, as it were, a supply of blood corpuscles given by the parents. So consequently, the child, which draws its blood from that source, does not realize its individuality. Not until all the blood is made by the child does it think of itself as I. And when the thymus gland disappears at the age of 14, that being feels reach its full expression, and the blood is made and dominated entirely by the ego. This is the Rosicrucianism that I was familiar with before coming into this book, that they had all of these rules about ages and that it tied into anatomy, and it always came across to me like, oh, you have to understand anatomy and geometry and math and all this stuff to get into Rosicrucianism. And this is the crux of one of those aspects. We talked about the spleen and the liver. Elsewhere in the book, they talk about like the exact functions of this, but this particular part, because it's come up in my research before about the thymus gland and how it does eventually decay, and it's almost at an inverse relation to the pineal gland, because in all the conspiracy theories we've all read, it's almost like commonplace that you're born with a healthy functioning pineal gland, and over the time it calcifies and it gets brain sand, right? It withers away. Well, the exact same thing happens to the thymus gland, but the thymus gland is actually supplying, this like aspect to your blood, to the rest of your body. And this interesting concept that until you're 14, all of that's coming from your parents, which has been stored up in that thymus gland. And then once it shrivels up, that's what determines manhood, I guess. That's what turns you into your own person with your own thoughts. It's actually that shriveling of the thymus gland.
And there was a person that I knew, I forgot, or one of my dad's friends, who he said that in Mexico there was this procedure where they would, because after a certain age, so 14, whatever, the thymus gland withers away, and there's a treatment supposedly that for anyone who has cancer or whatever, where they reactivate your thymus gland. They reactivate, and they described it as, when it's reactivated, it nukes your body of like any bad stuff. By stuff, I mean any cancerous cells, any disease. It nukes it. It's almost like setting off a nuke within your body by activating that, because it's pumping you full of all these hormones and all these things.
I feel like we're going to get flagged for medical advice now, you dick.
You think so, bro? I can clip that. 316. I don't think that's medical misinformation. It's just something, I'll write the timestamp down, bro, just in case, and I'll clip it out. But yeah, the thymus.
You heard it here. The cure for cancer is to have your thymus gland reactivated in Mexico.
Hold on. I think if we play this, I think we'll be okay. Hold on. Give me 1 second. So if we play this sound.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
I think we should be okay.
There we go. We're good now. We're good.
I think we're good. Yeah, I think we're good. I mean, worst case.
I just heard back from the lodge. We're good.
All right, cool. All right, nice. Let me write this timestamp down either way, but where are we at here? So 14. And then I had some other stuff here. The full-blooded person, when the blood is too hot, is active in the body and mind, while the anemic person is sleepy. You want to talk about the goeth part in writing in blood instead of ink? That's all you.
I didn't write that part down, actually.
You didn't? Do you want to talk about it? I mean, just use words that rhyme with the thing that it's supposed to insinuate.
I like the blood aspect where he talks about ego being in the blood, because this ties into so much of the other research that I'm not going to mention by name, but he says that
it rhymes with Google Chrome.
Yeah, it rhymes with Google Chrome. Pizza sauce is what we're calling it. But he says that Old Norsemen and Scots recognized the ego in the blood. No stranger could become associated with them as a relative until he had mixed blood with them and thus became one of them. Goethe, who was an initiate, also showed this in his Faust. Faust is about to sign the compact with Mephistopheles and asks, why not sign with ordinary ink? Why use blood? Mephisto answers, because blood is a most peculiar essence. This is because he knows that who has the blood has the man, that without the warm blood, ego can find no expression. This one was super deep to me, because like what is it about blood that adds all of this? Like blood magic is one of the oldest forms of fucking magic, and that's what gets into vampirism and eternal life. And even today in like Silicon Valley, when like the rich dudes strap up 18-year-olds and get the IV for blood transfusions, it's about that vitality and like this earlier forms of blood having vitality. And even like we just mentioned about those 14-year-olds where they're getting certain components of their blood from their parents, that they aren't their own person yet until they provide all of it for themselves. So once that moment hits at puberty, when a person starts providing their own ego and their own blood, I wonder if there's something special about that particular age, or maybe before that age, that you want to like capture that soul or that essence. Again, this, I wasn't expecting to read this in the Rosicrucian book, but it fits into so many other angles here.
Shit, and then I get into the Young talks about the snail, bro. I completely forgot to mention that, but he talks about it being a figure of the unconscious, and it's supposed to signify this other reality, the snail, and something about the ego, which we can get into later on. But yes, and also Mephistopheles, when he is presented to Wagner or Wagner, whatever you want to call him, he is presented to him as a black dog too, by the way. So this idea of dogs becoming humans or changing in this evolutionary chain, if you will, there's that connection there with Goeth.
Son of Sam saw Black Dog too, didn't he?
Yeah, and the dog was talking to him and told him to do what he did. But that's the end of chapter 3 and the end of where we got to. And I don't know, maybe we can continue this one and take it a step at a time and take it at a...
We'll hop around, we'll come back to it. But man, 3 chapters. We talked about chemical worlds, kingdoms. We talked about snails, ghost limbs, ghost stories, nails in the coffin,
Archons,
reptilians, archons, animal consciousness, more snail shells, the glove analogy, the condom analogy. Talked about Plato, Pythagoras. We talked about Christ consciousness, psychometry, seed atom, 21 grams experiment, cremation versus non-cremation, gold hoarders, drunkards, purgatory, reliving life backwards, children before 14 years, another snail analogy, all sorts of vibration stories about castle walls and color and synesthesia and three-dimensional sound. I mean, this was so packed with so many different topics that he does a decent job of relating them all to each other. If you were to give me this punch list and say, hey, you're going to cover all these topics in 3 chapters of a book from 1909, I wouldn't have believed it. So I definitely think that this was an interesting read. My balls hurt a little bit, but it was probably like a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I would rate it 4 out of 10 because the excruciating pain at the very end of the 3rd chapter, I was just...
But as we have learned, pain is the part that helps you learn. So that might be a good thing.
Who knows? So make sure to I posted hit the like. Don't be a bitch, right? Hit the like. It helps the channel. It's free 99. It'll pump us in the algorithm. Follow the Kickstarter. Right? You have to follow the Kickstarter. And
Where's
you don't have to buy.
Did we get any?
We got one. We got one. We got one. So we're from 50 to 51. And again, it's not that we want you to buy it. If you get signed up for it, it pumps us up in the algorithm. They're over on Kickstarter, and who knows, we might pull an Eric July and go viral and sell a whole bunch of copies of The Chosen One, and then we can do this for a living. So yeah, just sign up for that. Make sure to get notified on there. Patreon.com/the One Podcast. All that good stuff. Appreciate the people who signed up for the subscriber members here on YouTube. I'm not gonna say it, but the Patreon is better. There's a backlog right on YouTube. There's only so much that I can that I've uploaded. And yeah, tjojp.com. This was fun, Thomas. And you want to
ParanoidAmerica.com, Paranoid America on Instagram. If you're watching this right now on YouTube, go and follow me on YouTube too. If you're just on Juan's channel, share some of the love. Let's get me over 1,000 subscribers so I can hawk. What are you selling to people anyways on your advertisements? You ever watched your ads?
Yeah, I had like
what is it?
Illuminati dolphin at one point, and I don't know because
no,
I pay for you. No, for real. There was like a Illuminati, like a secret occultic Society of Dolphins that somebody sent me. I have YouTube Premium. I pay the lizard people to not get targeted ads. So I don't know.
I just want to know
what
if you're getting Toyota commercials or Pfizer commercials, or what are you pumping? What's getting latched onto these?
I don't know if anyone is watching it with the ads on. Let me know. Hit me up, because I'd be interested to know what they're putting on my channel. So, but this was fun, Thomas. And for the next one, I don't know what we're doing for the next Occult Book Club. We might do this other book, but I want to do something on Jung, bro. I want to do a book on Jung because I think it's really interesting. But yeah, let's hit the outro music for a little bit. Thank you for everyone who showed up. Love you guys. See you on the next one. This was fun. Night.